Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The crunch of leaves under my boots was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. I'd been hiking for hours, and the realization was slowly sinking in. I was hopelessly lost. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the forest floor, a chill ran down my spine. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. Hope and dread battled in my chest as I moved towards the light. I'd always prided myself on my outdoor skills. Growing up in Colorado, I'd spent countless weekends exploring the Rockies with my dad. But this solo trip into the Adirondacks was different. The terrain was unfamiliar, and I'd foolishly ignored the warning signs of an incoming storm. The day had started perfectly. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the promise of adventure had lured me deeper into the wilderness than I'd planned. I'd been so caught up in the beauty of my surroundings that I hadn't noticed the gradual shift in the weather. By the time the first raindrops hit, I was miles off the marked trail. I'd tried to retrace my steps, but the rain had washed away any tracks I might have left. The trees all looked the same, an endless sea of green and brown. As panic set in, I'd made the cardinal mistake of every lost hiker. I'd started moving faster, more erratically, each step taking me further from safety. Now, as darkness fell, that distant light was my only hope. I pushed through the underbrush, ignoring the scratches from branches and the squelch of mud beneath my feet. The light grew stronger, and I could make out the flickering of what I hoped was a campfire. As I got closer, I slowed my pace. Something didn't feel right. The campsite, if that's what it was too quiet. No chatter, no sounds of people moving about, just the crackle of flames and an occasional metallic clang. I crouched behind a large oak, peering around its trunk. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a campsite, at least not any kind I'd ever seen before. 3 large tents formed a semicircle around a roaring fire. But these weren't the colorful nylon tents of hikers. They were heavy-duty, military-style setups, complete with camouflage netting. Around the fire, I could see crates stacked high, some open to reveal the glint of metal inside. My mind raced. What was this place? Who would set up a camp like this in the middle of nowhere? As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed movement. A man emerged from one of the tents, rifle slung over his shoulder. He was followed by another, then another. I counted 5 in total, all armed, all moving with a purpose that spoke of military training. I knew I should leave, to back away slowly and run as fast and as far as I could. But curiosity and desperation kept me rooted to the spot. These men might be dangerous, but they also might be my only chance of finding my way out of this forest. As I weighed my options, a gust of wind carried their voices to me. "The shipment's late," one man growled. "If they don't show in the next hour, we move to Plan B." "Relax," another replied. "They know the consequences of screwing us over. They'll be here." Shipment? Consequences? The pit in my stomach grew. Whatever was happening here, it was clear I'd stumbled onto something illegal and potentially deadly. I started to back away, trying to control my breathing and move as silently as possible. But in my haste, I didn't watch where I was stepping. A dry branch snapped under my foot, the crack echoing like a gunshot in the quiet forest. The men at the camp froze. Then, with practiced efficiency, they fanned out, rifles at the ready. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the thunder of boots giving chase. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted through the dark forest. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but fear drove me on. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to put as much distance between myself and those men as possible. A bullet whizzed past my ear, splintering the bark of a tree just inches from my head. They were shooting at me. The realization gave me a new burst of speed. I zigged and zagged, using the trees for cover as best I could. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the chaos of the chase. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare stop. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but I couldn't be sure if I was actually losing them or if they were just being more cautious in their approach. Finally, when I felt I couldn't take another step, I spotted a hollow at the base of a massive old tree. Without thinking, I dove into it, pressing myself as far back into the shadows as I could. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to muffle the sound of my ragged breathing. Minutes passed like hours as I huddled in that hollow. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Twice, I saw flashlight beams sweep past my hiding spot. Each time I was certain I'd be discovered, but somehow, miraculously, they passed me by. As the night wore on, the sounds of the search grew more distant. Still, I didn't move. I was too afraid, too exhausted. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, weak sunlight was filtering through the leaves. I cautiously emerged from my hiding spot, every muscle in my body protesting the movement. The forest was quiet now, but not the oppressive silence of the night before. I could hear birds chirping, small animals scurrying about, normal forest sounds that I never thought I'd be so grateful to hear. I was lost, hungry, and exhausted, but I was alive. And in the light of day, with the immediate danger past, I could think more clearly. I remembered my basic wilderness training. Find high ground, look for landmarks. It took me most of the day, but I finally found a trail. From there, it was a long, painful hike back to civilization. When I finally stumbled into a ranger station, I must have looked like a wild man. The rangers were alarmed, but kind. They gave me food, water, and medical attention for my cuts and bruises. I told them everything, about getting lost, about the camp I'd found, about being chased through the night. They took my statement seriously, immediately calling in state police and even the FBI. In the days that followed, I learned that I'd stumbled upon a major gun-running operation. The authorities had been trying to track this group for months. My accidental discovery had given them the break they needed to finally shut it down. It's been years since that night in the forest, but I still have nightmares about it. The crack of gunfire, the pounding of boots behind me, the terrifying certainty that each breath could be my last. I still hike, still love the outdoors, but I'm a lot more careful now. I always stick to marked trails, always let someone know where I'm going and when I'll be back. And sometimes, when I'm in the woods and the light starts to fade, I can't help but scan the trees, half expecting to see that distant, deceptive glow of a campfire that's anything but welcoming. The glow of my phone screen illuminated the darkened living room as I scrolled through the responses to my ad. 2005, Honda Civic, good condition, must sell. I needed the cash, and fast. One reply caught my eye, a guy named Mike, asking to meet for a test drive. Little did I know, that message would lead me into a nightmare I never saw coming. I'd always been cautious about meeting strangers from the internet, but desperation has a way of clouding your judgment. My rent was due, and the extra cash from selling my old car would be a lifesaver. So when Mike suggested meeting at a quiet park just outside of town for the test drive, I pushed aside my misgivings and agreed. The day of the meeting dawned bright and clear. I gave the Civic a quick wash, hoping the gleaming blue paint would help seal the deal. As I drove to the meeting spot, I rehearsed my sales pitch in my head. Low mileage, regular oil changes, great gas mileage. I was so focused on making the sale that I didn't notice how the houses grew sparse and the road narrowed as I approached the park. I pulled into the small gravel lot and checked my watch. 10 minutes early. Perfect. I got out and leaned against the car, trying to look casual as I scanned the empty park. It was quieter than I expected, with only the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls breaking the silence. A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled in. A man got out, tall, probably in his mid-30s, with close-cropped hair and a friendly smile. He walked over, hand extended. "Hey, you must be Alex. I'm Mike." We shook hands, and I launched into my rehearsed spiel about the car. Mike nodded along, asking all the right questions about mileage and maintenance. He seemed genuinely interested, and I started to relax. Maybe I'd been paranoid for nothing. "Mind if we take it for a spin?" Mike asked, gesturing down the road. "Sure thing," I replied, tossing him the keys. "There's a nice loop around the lake if you want to really put it through its paces." Mike slid into the driver's seat, and I got in on the passenger side. As we pulled out of the lot, I noticed his SUV had out-of-state plates. I was about to ask where he was from when he suddenly accelerated, tires squealing on the pavement. "Whoa, take it easy." I laughed nervously. "She's not a race car." Mike didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The speedometer crept past 60, then 70. Trees whipped by in a green blur. "Seriously, man, slow down," I said, my heart starting to race. "You're going to get us killed." He turned to look at me then, and the friendly smile was gone. In its place was something cold, calculating. Fear gripped my chest as I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. "You're not going anywhere," Mike said, his voice low and menacing. I reached for the door handle, but he swerved sharply, throwing me against the window. Stars exploded in my vision as my head connected with the glass. By the time I regained my senses, we were turning onto a dirt road I didn't recognize. "Listen, just take the car," I stammered. "I won't call the cops, I swear. Just let me out here." Mike laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, this isn't about the car, Alex. This is about you." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Did I know this guy? Had I wronged him somehow? But I was certain I'd never seen him before today. The dirt road ended at a small clearing. An old barn stood at one end, its red paint faded and peeling. Mike stopped the car and turned to me, pulling a gun from his waistband. "Get out," he ordered, "and don't try anything stupid." On shaking legs, I got out of the car. Mike marched me toward the barn, the gun pressed against my back. As we got closer, I could hear muffled sounds coming from inside. My blood ran cold as I realized what they were, human voices crying out in fear and pain. Mike shoved me through the barn door. The smell hit me first, sweat, blood, and fear. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw them, at least a dozen people, men and women of various ages, all bound and gagged. Their eyes widened in terror as they saw me, another victim being added to their ranks. "Welcome to your new life, Alex," Mike sneered, shoving me to the ground. "Hope you enjoy manual labor because you're going to be doing a lot of it." As he tied my hands behind my back, the reality of my situation sank in. This wasn't a simple carjacking. I'd stumbled into something far worse, a human trafficking operation. The next few hours were a blur of fear and confusion. More men arrived, speaking in hushed tones with Mike. I caught snippets of their conversation, talk of shipments and buyers. Each word drove home the horror of what was happening. As night fell, they began loading us into a large truck. We were packed in like cattle, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and terror. I tried to stay calm, to think of a way out, but panic clouded my thoughts. The truck rumbled to life and we began to move. Through a small crack in the truck's panel, I could see flashes of the world outside, trees, then buildings, then open highway. We were leaving the city, heading who knows where. Hours passed. People around me sobbed quietly or sat in stunned silence. I flexed my wrists against the rope, feeling it bite into my skin. If I could just get free, maybe I could, jump from a moving truck. Even if I survived the fall, I had no idea where we were. Suddenly, the truck swerved sharply. I was thrown against the wall, pain exploding in my shoulder. There were shouts from outside, the screech of tires. We came to an abrupt stop, the force sending us tumbling over each other. For a moment, there was silence. Then, chaos erupted. The back of the truck flew open, and bright lights flooded in. I squinted against the glare, making out the shapes of armed figures swarming into the truck. "Police, everyone stay calm." Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. Somehow, miraculously, we'd been found. As an officer cut the ropes from my wrists, the full weight of what I'd just been through hit me. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The next few days were a whirlwind of police statements, medical checkups, and tearful reunions with my frantic family. I learned that the police had been tracking this trafficking ring for months. My chance encounter with Mike had led them right to the operation's heart. Mike, whose real name turned out to be Eric Lawson, was arrested along with several others. The park where we'd met was a common pickup point for their victims. They'd been using online marketplaces to lure people to remote locations, counting on the victims' desire for a good deal to override their caution. As I sat in my living room, staring at the "For Sale" sign still propped against my old Civic in the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to disappearing forever. The car that I'd been so desperate to sell had nearly cost me everything. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into therapy and support groups for survivors of trafficking attempts. Slowly, I began to heal. I learned to trust again, to not see danger in every stranger. But I also learned the value of trusting my instincts, of listening to that little voice that says, "Something's not right here." I still have my Civic. I can't bring myself to sell it now. It's a reminder of how quickly life can change, of how a simple decision can lead you down a path you never expected. Every time I get behind the wheel, I'm reminded to be grateful for my freedom and to never take it for granted. Sometimes, when I'm driving down a quiet road, I'll catch a glimpse of a lone car pulled over, someone looking under the hood or checking a tire. And for a split second, I'll be back in that park, meeting a stranger with a friendly smile and evil intentions. In those moments, I say a silent prayer for all those who weren't as lucky as I was, and I promise myself to always be vigilant, to always be aware. Because the truth is, danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it comes with a smile and a handshake, with a too-good-to-be-true offer. And sometimes, the difference between safety and unimaginable horror is as simple as where you choose to meet a stranger for a test drive. The zipper of my tent seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the night. I froze, my hand halfway through the motion, straining my ears. There it was again, a twig snapping, leaves rustling. Something was out there, circling my campsite. And whatever it wasn't just some curious raccoon. I'd always loved camping alone. There's a special kind of peace you find when it's just you and nature, miles from the nearest hint of civilization. At least, that's what I used to think. Now, as I lay in my sleeping bag, heart thundering in my chest, I was starting to reconsider my stance on solitude. The day had started like any other solo camping trip. I'd hiked deep into the Ozarks, reveling in the lush green canopy and the songs of birds I couldn't name. By late afternoon, I'd found the perfect spot to set up camp, a small clearing near a babbling stream, sheltered by towering oaks. As I'd pitched my tent and gathered firewood, I'd felt that familiar sense of contentment wash over me. This was where I belonged, away from the noise and stress of city life. I'd cooked a simple meal over the campfire, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. But as darkness fell, an uneasy feeling had started to creep in. Maybe it was the way the wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Or maybe it was the strange call I'd heard just as I was dousing the fire. Not quite a wolf, not quite a coyote, but something in between. I'd tried to shake it off, telling myself I was letting my imagination run wild. I'd crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever dangers lurked in the forest. Sleep had come fitfully, filled with half-formed dreams of shadowy figures and glowing eyes. And now, in the dead of night, those dreams seemed to be taking shape in the waking world. Another snap, closer this time. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever was out there, it was getting bolder. I needed to see what I was dealing with. Slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, I reached for my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness as I shone it through the mesh window of my tent. For a moment, all I could see were the familiar shapes of trees and underbrush. Then, a flash of movement caught my eye. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure, humanoid in shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly off in a way that sent shivers down my spine. And it was staring directly at me. I blinked, sure I must be seeing things. But when my eyes opened, it was still there, motionless, watching. Fight or flight kicked in, and flight won out. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, fumbling with the tent zipper. Part of me knew I was being irrational. If it was a person, running blindly into the dark forest was probably the worst thing I could do. But fear isn't rational, and right then, all I could think about was putting as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. I burst out of the tent, my bare feet slapping against the cool earth. I ran without direction, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I heard movement, something crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, faster. In the back of my mind, a voice screamed that I was lost, that I had no idea where I was going. I ignored it. All that mattered was escape. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. I was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment. Pain exploded through my body as I hit the bottom. The wind knocked out of me. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and gasping for breath. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped me back to reality. I looked around wildly, searching for somewhere to hide. My eyes landed on a hollow log a few feet away. It was a tight fit, but fear gave me strength I didn't know I had. I wedged myself inside, ignoring the protests of my battered body. From my hiding spot, I watched with wide eyes as a pair of feet came into view. They were bare, pale in the moonlight, with toes that seemed too long, too pointed. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it would give me away. The feet paused, turning this way and that. I held my breath, praying to whatever might be listening that it wouldn't find me. After what felt like an eternity, the feet moved on, disappearing from my limited field of vision. I didn't dare move. Hours seemed to pass as I lay there, every muscle tense, straining my ears for any sign of the creature's return. Gradually, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me acutely aware of every scrape and bruise from my headlong flight through the forest. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally allowed myself to relax a fraction. Whatever that thing was, it seemed to have given up the chase. Carefully, moving as quietly as I could, I extracted myself from the log. Standing up, I took stock of my surroundings. I was in a small gully, dense forest rising on all sides. I had no idea which direction I'd come from, no clue how to get back to my campsite. Not that I particularly wanted to go back there. With the growing light came a semblance of rational thought. I needed to find my way out of these woods, back to civilization. But first, I needed to get my bearings. I started climbing the least steep side of the gully, using tree roots as handholds. It was slow going, my body protesting every movement. But fear of being trapped in this forest with that, whatever it was, drove me on. Reaching the top, I paused to catch my breath. That's when I saw it, a gap in the trees, revealing a vista of rolling hills. And there, in the far distance, a glint of sunlight off metal. A road. Hope surged through me. I had a direction now, a goal. I set off, keeping that distant glimmer in sight. The going was tough, The forest was thick, the ground uneven. More than once, I lost sight of my guiding light, panic rising in my throat until I could spot it again. As I walked, my mind kept returning to what I'd seen last night. In the light of day, it seemed almost absurd. Surely it had been a person, maybe a homeless man or another camper. The strange proportions, the inhuman movement. That must have been a trick of the shadows, my fear-addled brain playing tricks on me. But then I'd remember those feet, so clearly not human, and the doubts would creep back in. It was late afternoon by the time I finally broke free of the tree line. The road I'd spotted was a highway, and I could have cried with relief at the sight of cars zooming past. I must have been quite a sight. Barefoot, clothes torn, covered in dirt and scratches. But I didn't care. I was safe. A kind truck driver stopped and gave me a ride to the nearest town. From there, it was a series of phone calls to the police to report what had happened, leaving out the more fantastical elements, to my family to let them know I was okay, to a friend to beg for a ride home. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd seen a bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe it had all been an incredibly vivid nightmare, brought on by too many campfire stories and an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever I'd encountered in those woods, it wasn't something that could be explained away so easily. It had been real, and it had been hunting me. I haven't been camping since that night. My tent and sleeping bag gathered dust in a closet, a reminder of a hobby I once loved but can no longer bring myself to enjoy. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I find myself tensing up, straining my ears for the snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves. And sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in that forest, running, always running, with the certainty that if I look back, I'll see that figure again. Tall, thin, wrong, watching me with eyes that gleam with inhuman intelligence. I wake from these dreams in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and as I lie there in the dark, trying to calm my breathing, a part of me wonders, if I saw that figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep, would I even be surprised? Because the truth is, once you've seen something like that, you can never truly unsee it. The veil between our world and whatever lies beyond has been lifted, if only for a moment. And you're left with the unshakable knowledge that sometimes, when you're alone in the wilderness, you're not really alone at all. The key felt unnaturally heavy in my hand as I stood before the towering oak doors of the Blackwood mansion. A cool breeze whispered through the overgrown gardens, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn and run. It was just a house, I told myself, just a job. But as I slid the key into the lock, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was opening the door to something far more sinister than I could imagine. I'd been desperate for work when I saw the ad online. House sitter needed for historic estate. Good pay, minimal responsibilities. It had seemed too good to be true, and maybe it was, but beggars can't be choosers, and my bank account was screaming for relief. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, were an elderly couple who split their time between their various properties. They'd conducted the interview over video chat, their faces partially obscured by poor lighting and worse internet connection. They seemed nice enough, if a bit eccentric. Their instructions had been simple: maintain the grounds, ensure the house stays in good condition, and under no circumstances enter the east wing of the third floor. That last bit had raised a red flag, but the promise of a generous paycheck had quickly silenced my doubts. Now, as I stepped into the cavernous foyer, those doubts came rushing back with a vengeance. The interior of the mansion was like stepping back in time. Heavy velvet drapes blocked out most of the natural light, leaving the space in a perpetual twilight. Ornate furniture, draped in white sheets, loomed like ghosts in the shadows. The air was thick with the musty smell of disuse, tinged with something I couldn't quite place, something metallic and vaguely unpleasant. I spent that first day exploring the parts of the house I was allowed to enter, familiarizing myself with the layout. The kitchen was a mix of modern appliances and antique fixtures. The library was filled floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, their spines cracked with age. Each room seemed to hold countless secrets, whispers of a bygone era. As night fell, I retreated to the small bedroom the Blackwoods had designated as my living quarters. It was comfortable enough, with a four-poster bed and a writing desk by the window. But as I lay there in the darkness, trying to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The first week passed without incident. I settled into a routine of cleaning, minor repairs, and long walks through the sprawling gardens. But always gnaw in the back of my mind was the forbidden East Wing. What could possibly be up there that I wasn't allowed to see? It was on the 8th night that I first heard the noises. I was in the kitchen, warming up some leftovers, when a loud thump echoed through the house. I froze, my hand hovering over the microwave button. For a moment, silence. Then another thump, followed by what sounded like scratching. My heart raced as I tried to pinpoint the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from upstairs, specifically from the direction of the East Wing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" No response, just more scratching. It could be rats, I told myself, or raccoons that had found their way inside. But deep down, I knew it was something else entirely. I should have called the Blackwoods right then. Should have reported the disturbance and let them handle it. But curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way upstairs. The third floor was darker than the rest of the house, the air noticeably colder. As I approached the East Wing, the scratching grew louder. It was coming from behind a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. A door secured with a padlock that looked far too new compared to the rest of the house's antique fixtures. I stood there for what felt like hours, my hand hovering over the padlock, warring with myself. The Blackwoods' warning echoed in my mind, but so did the scratching, insistent and somehow desperate. In the end, curiosity won out. I ran back downstairs and grabbed a set of bolt cutters from the tool shed. The padlock put up little resistance. The door creaked open, revealing a long, dark hallway. The scratching had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The first thing that hit me was the smell. That metallic scent I'd noticed when I first entered the house was much stronger here, mixed with the unmistakable stench of rot. I gagged, fighting the urge to retreat. The beam of my flashlight revealed peeling wallpaper and threadbare carpets. But it was the walls that truly caught my attention. They were covered in strange symbols, carved directly into the plaster. Some I recognized from my limited knowledge of the occult: pentagrams, eyes of Horus, and other mystical signs. Others were completely foreign to me, their twisted forms sending shivers down my spine. At the end of the hallway was another door, this one slightly ajar. As I approached, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, guttural growl, followed by the rattle of chains. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But something compelled me forward. I pushed the door open, my flashlight illuminating the room beyond. What I saw in that room will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was some kind of laboratory, filled with arcane equipment and jars of unidentifiable specimens. In the center of the room was a large metal table, and on that table, I still struggle to describe it. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every possible way. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at impossible angles. The skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over a frame that seemed to be constantly shifting, and its face, God, its face, where there should have been features, there was only a mass of writhing tentacles. The creature was chained to the table, but as my light fell upon it, it began to thrash wildly. The chains groaned under the strain, and then it spoke, in a voice that was somehow both a whisper and a scream. Free. Me. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by stress and isolation. But the creature's struggles were all too real. One of the chains snapped with a sound like a gunshot. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me. I flew down the stairs, my only thought to get out of the house. But as I reached the foyer, I came face to face with Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. They stood there, eerily calm, as if finding their house sitter fleeing in terror was an everyday occurrence. Mr. Blackwood's eyes flicked to the bolt cutter still clutched in my hand, and his expression hardened. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Mrs. Blackwood asked, her voice devoid of emotion. I nodded, unable to form words. "Such a pity," Mr. Blackwood sighed. "We had high hopes for you, but I suppose there's no helping it now." As he spoke, I noticed something odd about their appearances. Their skin seemed to ripple and shift, like there was something moving underneath. With dawning horror, I realized the truth. The creature upstairs wasn't their prisoner or their experiment. It was their child, and they were no more human than it was. I didn't wait for them to make a move. I shoved past them and out the front door, running as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked half a mile down the road. As I sped away from Blackwood Mansion, my mind raced with questions. What were those things? Where did they come from? And how many more were out there, hiding behind human facades? I've spent the years since that night trying to forget what I saw in that house. I've moved cities, changed my name, done everything I can to disappear. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that creature's voice, still smell that metallic stench. And sometimes, when I pass a stately old house with drawn curtains and overgrown gardens, I can't help but wonder, what secrets are hiding behind those walls? What horrors are waiting to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting world? I may never know the full truth about the Blackwoods and their monstrous offspring, but one thing I know for certain, I'll never again take a job without asking a lot more questions first. Because sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't the monsters hiding in the shadows. They're the ones hiding in plain sight, wearing human faces and offering you the key to their home. The headlights appeared in my rearview mirror like twin specters, piercing through the darkness of the desert night. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another traveler on this lonely stretch of highway. But as the minutes ticked by and the car behind me maintained its unnervingly constant distance, a seed of unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. Little did I know, this was the beginning of a night that would push me to the very edge of terror and survival. I'd been driving for hours, making my way across the vast expanse of Nevada on my way to a new job in California. The monotony of the desert landscape had long since blurred into a never-ending sea of scrub brush and sand, broken only by the occasional neon oasis of a gas station or diner. It was late, well past midnight, and fatigue was starting to set in. I'd been considering pulling over at the next rest stop to catch a few hours of sleep when those headlights first appeared. At the time, I was almost grateful for their presence. Another soul out here in the middle of nowhere. It made me feel a little less alone. But as the miles rolled by and the car behind me neither passed nor fell back, that initial comfort morphed into something else entirely. I found myself glancing more and more frequently at my rearview mirror, trying to make out any details of the vehicle or its driver. The glare of the headlights made it impossible to see anything clearly, just a dark silhouette that seemed to grow more menacing with each passing minute. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just as tired as I was, using my taillights as a guide to stay on the road. Or perhaps they were nervous about passing on this narrow two-lane highway. But no matter how I tried to explain it away, that nagging feeling of wrongness persisted. Deciding to test my theory, I eased off the gas, letting my speed drop from 70 to 60, then 50. The car behind me slowed to match, maintaining that same eerie distance. My heart rate picked up, and I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my spine despite the cool air blasting from the AC. I sped up again, pushing my old sedan to 80, then 90. The headlights stayed with me, growing neither closer nor farther away. It was like they were tethered to my bumper by some invisible cord. This is crazy, I muttered to myself, easing back down to a legal speed. You're letting your imagination run wild. It's just a car. But even as I said it, I knew deep down that this was anything but normal. I fumbled for my phone, thinking to call, who? The police. Out here, in the middle of nowhere. What would I even say? Help. I'm being followed by a car that's keeping its distance. They'd laugh me off the line. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat in frustration, then nearly jumped out of my skin as it buzzed loudly. Unknown number. My finger hovered over the answer button, a war between curiosity and fear raging in my mind. In the end, fear won out. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, it buzzed again, a text this time. With trembling fingers, I swiped to read it. Pull over. Ice flooded my veins. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence, some wrong number with impeccable timing. But even as I tried to convince myself of this, the car behind me flashed its high beams, as if to emphasize the message. Fight or flight kicked in, and I chose flight. I stomped on the accelerator, my car's engine whining in protest as I pushed it to its limits. The speedometer crept past 100, the desert landscape outside becoming a dark blur. But no matter how fast I went, those headlights stayed with me. Impossibly, they seemed to be getting closer now, the glare filling my rearview mirror, blinding me. I was so focused on the rearview mirror that I almost missed the sharp bend in the road ahead. I wrenched the steering wheel, tires squealing as I barely made the turn. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to flip, but somehow I maintained control. The headlights behind me swung wide, and for a brief, hopeful moment, I thought I'd lost them, but they recovered quickly, once again taking up their position behind me. My phone buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I glanced at it. You can't escape. A sob of fear escaped my throat. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. These things didn't happen in real life. Up ahead, I saw salvation, a gas station, its fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness like a lighthouse beacon. I didn't care that it looked old and run down. It was civilization, safety. I took the exit at speeds that sent my car fishtailing, gravel pinging against the undercarriage as I skidded into the parking lot. I screeched to a halt next to a gas pump and leapt out of the car, ready to run inside and beg for help. But as I turned back to the road, my blood ran cold. There was no one there. The highway stretched out, empty and silent in both directions. No headlights, no menacing car, nothing. Had I imagined it all? Was I so tired that I'd conjured up this entire scenario in my fatigued mind? Shaken and confused, I made my way inside the gas station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over rows of snacks and drinks. Behind the counter, an old man dozed in a chair, his chin resting on his chest. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quavering. I think I'm being followed." The old man's eyes cracked open, regarding me with a mixture of annoyance and concern. "Followed, you say? Ain't seen another car out here for hours." I tried to explain what had happened, but even to my own ears, it sounded absurd. The old man listened patiently, then shook his head. "Sounds to me like you need some rest, young fella. There's a motel about 20 miles up the road. Why don't you fuel up and head there?" Feeling foolish but still shaken, I nodded and went back outside to pump gas. As the numbers on the pump ticked upward, I scanned the dark highway, half expecting to see those headlights reappear. But there was nothing. I paid for the gas and a large coffee, then got back on the road, determined to make it to the motel. The old man's words had reassured me somewhat. and I was starting to believe that maybe I had just let my imagination get the better of me. That belief lasted all of 5 minutes. As I merged back onto the highway, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, seeming to materialize out of thin air. My heart, which had just begun to slow, immediately began racing again. No, I told myself, it's just another car. There's nothing sinister about it. But as the minutes ticked by and the car maintained that same precise distance, I felt the panic begin to rise again. My palms grew sweaty on the steering wheel, and I found myself pressing harder on the gas pedal. My phone buzzed. With a trembling hand, I picked it up. Did you really think you could hide? A scream caught in my throat. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I tossed the phone aside and focused all my attention on driving. The motel. I just had to make it to the motel. 20 miles. I could do this. But with each passing mile, the headlights seemed to grow closer. I could swear I saw a figure behind the wheel now, a dark shape with eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. 15 miles. 10. 5. The motel's neon sign appeared in the distance, a beacon of hope. I was going to make it. And then, just as the exit for the motel came into view, my engine sputtered and died. No, 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 I cried, frantically turning the key. The engine wheezed but wouldn't catch. I looked in the rearview mirror. The headlights were almost upon me now. In desperation, I threw open my door and ran, abandoning my car in the middle of the road. I sprinted towards the motel, my lungs burning, my legs feeling like lead. Behind me, I heard a car door slam. Footsteps, fast and heavy, pursuing me. I reached the motel parking lot and risked a glance back. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The figure chasing me wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that were too long and moved in ways that defied anatomy. Its face, if you could call it that, was a void, a black hole that seemed to absorb all light. I crashed through the motel office door, screaming for help. The night manager looked up in shock, but before he could say anything, the thing burst in behind me. What happened next is a blur. I remember screaming, a struggle, the sound of breaking glass, and then darkness. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. They told me I'd been in a car accident, that I'd been hallucinating from a head injury. They found my car wrapped around a guardrail 5 miles from the motel. But I know what I saw. I know what chased me. Sometimes, late at night, I'll see headlights in my rearview mirror. And for a moment, just a moment, they'll maintain that precise, impossible distance. And I'll wonder, is it happening again? Or did it ever really stop? The sound of metal scraping against metal jolted me awake. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar shadows of the motel room playing tricks on my tired eyes. Then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to unlock my door. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized this was no dream. Someone was trying to get in. I hadn't planned on stopping at this rundown motel off Interstate 40. My cross-country drive from New York to Los Angeles was supposed to be non-stop, fueled by energy drinks and the promise of a new life waiting for me on the West Coast. But after 16 hours on the road, exhaustion had won out. The flickering neon vacancy sign had been a beacon in the night, promising a few hours of much-needed rest. Now, as I lay frozen in bed, listening to the persistent scratching at my door, I was regretting my decision. The lock clicked, and the door began to inch open. In a panic, I rolled off the bed and onto the floor, my mind racing. Who was breaking in? A thief. Someone with far worse intentions. I cursed myself for not checking that the deadbolt was secure before collapsing into bed. The door swung open fully, and a shaft of light from the parking lot cut through the darkness. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, definitely male. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me huddled on the far side of the bed. "Hello?" A gruff voice called out, "Sorry to disturb you, but there's been a mix-up with the rooms." I remained silent, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The man took a step into the room, fumbling for the light switch. "I know someone's in here. The front desk said this room was occupied." The overhead light flickered on, harsh and sudden. I squinted against the glare, momentarily blinded. "What the hell?" the man exclaimed, finally spotting me on the floor. "What are you doing?" I scrambled to my feet, keeping the bed between us. "What am I doing? What are you doing? This is my room." The man held up his hands, a key card clutched in one of them. "Whoa, calm down. Like I said, there's been a mix-up. The front desk gave me this key and told me this was my room." I eyed him warily. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, pretty standard attire for Middle America. Nothing about him screamed dangerous criminal. But then again, I'd watched enough true crime shows to know that looks could be deceiving. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's obviously been a mistake. Why don't you go back to the front desk and sort this out?" He nodded, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. "Yeah, that's probably best. Sorry about this." He turned to leave us, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But as he reached for the door handle, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. "Ah, hell," the man muttered. "Power outage." I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. The man was still by the door, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Maybe we should both go to the front desk," I suggested, not wanting to be left alone in a dark room with a stranger who had a key to my door. He nodded, and we stepped out into the hallway. The emergency lights were on, casting an eerie glow over the worn carpet and peeling wallpaper. As we made our way to the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The front desk was deserted. No night manager, no sign of where they might have gone. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone here?" Silence. The man, who had introduced himself as Mike during our walk, tried the door to the back office. Locked. "This is weird," he muttered. "There was a guy here when I checked in not 20 minutes ago." A chill ran down my spine. "We should call the police." Mike nodded, pulling out his phone. His frown deepened. "No signal. You?" I checked my own phone. "Nothing. Same here." We stood there in the dim emergency lighting, the silence of the motel pressing in around us. It was as if the whole world had suddenly gone quiet. "Maybe we should check outside," Mike suggested. "See if anyone else is around." I hesitated. On one hand, I didn't want to go anywhere with this stranger. On the other, the thought of being alone in this eerily silent motel was even less appealing. "Okay," I agreed. "But let's be quick." We pushed open the front doors and stepped out into the parking lot. The first thing I noticed was the cars, or rather, the lack of them. When I'd pulled in earlier, there had been at least a half dozen other vehicles. Now, the lot was empty except for my beat-up Honda and what I assumed was Mike's pickup truck. "Where is everyone?" I whispered, more to myself than to Mike. He shook his head, looking as bewildered as I felt. "I don't know. This isn't right." We walked to the road, hoping to flag down a passing car, but the highway, which had been busy even at this late hour when I arrived, was deserted. No cars, no trucks, not even the distant sound of an engine. What the hell is going on? Mike's voice had an edge of panic to it now. I was about to suggest we try walking to the next town when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows across the road. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. Mike," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see that?" He followed my gaze, tensing beside me. "Yeah. What is it?" As if in response to his question, the shape moved into the dim light cast by the motel's sign. My breath caught in my throat. It was humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, its limbs too long and jointed in impossible ways. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shift and ripple like oil on water. And its face, where there should have been features, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse, like a mannequin's head. "Run," Mike breathed. "Run!" We turned and sprinted back towards the motel. Behind us, I heard a sound, not footsteps, but a wet, slithering noise that turned my stomach. We burst through the front doors, slamming them shut behind us. Mike dragged a heavy chair in front of them, barricading us in. "What was that thing?" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. Mike shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it." A thud against the door made us both jump. The thing was out there, trying to get in. "We need to find a way out of here," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. We ran through the motel, checking every door and window, all locked, all unbreakable. It was as if the building had transformed into a fortress, or a prison. As we returned to the lobby, defeated and terrified, I noticed something I hadn't before. The clock behind the front desk had stopped. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the time it showed. 12 wow, midnight, the witching hour. "Mike," I said slowly, "what time did you check in?" He glanced at his watch, then did a double take. "That's impossible. My watch says midnight too, but I checked in around 11:30. A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. What if we're not in the real world anymore? What if when the clock struck midnight, we were transported somewhere else? Mike looked at me like I was crazy, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. After what we'd seen outside, was anything really impossible? The pounding on the front door grew louder. Cracks began to appear in the wood. "We need to find a way to break this, whatever it is," I said. "There has to be a way to get back to our world." Mike nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Okay, let's think. In stories, there's always a key or a ritual or something. What changed when you got here? Did you do anything unusual?" I racked my brain, trying to remember every detail of my check-in. "The key card," I said suddenly. "The manager made a big deal about not losing it, said it was the key to a good night's rest." Mike's eyes widened. "That's it. Where's your key card?" I patted my pockets, panic rising when I came up empty. "It must be in my room." We raced back up the stairs, the sound of splintering wood echoing behind us. Whatever that thing was, it was getting in. My hands shook as I searched the room, tossing aside blankets and rifling through my bags. Finally, I found it, tucked into the pages of the Gideon Bible in the nightstand drawer. "I've got it!" I yelled triumphantly. Just then, we heard it, the wet, slithering sound coming up the stairs. "What do we do?" Mike asked, his voice tight with fear. I looked at the key card, then at the door. Maybe we need to check out." It was a wild guess, but it was all we had. I rushed to the door and swiped the card through the reader. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the world seemed to shift and blur around us. I felt a sensation like falling, and then I jolted awake in my car, parked in front of the motel. The dashboard clock read 11:28 p.m. My heart was racing, but as I looked around, everything seemed normal. Cars in the parking lot, lights on in the office. As I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened, another car pulled in. A pickup truck. The man who got out looked familiar. Salt and pepper hair, flannel shirt. Our eyes met, and I saw the same mix of relief and lingering fear that I felt. Without a word, we both put our vehicles in gear and drove away, leaving the motel and its secrets behind us in the rearview mirror. To this day, I don't know if what we experienced was real or some kind of shared hallucination. But one thing's for certain. I never stay in roadside motels anymore, and I always check out before midnight. The bone was bleached white, peeking out from beneath a carpet of fallen leaves. At first, I thought it was just an animal remnant, nothing unusual for a hike in the national park. But as I bent down to examine it closer, a chill ran down my spine. The shape was unmistakable, a human femur. And it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My wife, Sarah, and I had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. Both of us worked high-stress jobs in the city, and the promise of a week surrounded by nature was exactly what we needed. We'd chosen a remote trail in Yellowstone, eager to escape the crowds and truly immerse ourselves in the wilderness. The first 2 days had been perfect. We'd hiked through breathtaking landscapes, marveled at wildlife from a safe distance, and spent our evenings huddled around a campfire, reconnecting in a way we hadn't in years. It was on the third day, as we ventured off the main trail in search of a secluded spot for lunch, that everything changed. I was leading the way, pushing through a dense patch of underbrush, when my foot caught on something hard. That's when I saw it, the bone, partially buried but unmistakably human. Sarah came up behind me, her excited chatter about the morning's hike dying on her lips as she saw what I was staring at. "Is that?" she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. I nodded, my mouth dry. "I think so. We need to call the park rangers." But as I reached for my phone, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Look." I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. A few feet away, partially hidden by a fallen log, was another bone. And beyond that, another. It wasn't just a single remain. It was a trail. Against my better judgment, I found myself following the grisly path. Sarah stayed close behind, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As we pushed deeper into the woods, the bones became more frequent, ribs poking out from beneath rotting leaves, a skull, its empty eye sockets staring accusingly at us. It was like walking through a nightmare, and then we saw it, a clearing up ahead. As we emerged from the trees, the full horror of what we'd stumbled upon revealed itself. The small meadow was littered with bones, some bleached white by the sun, others still bearing scraps of decaying flesh. At least a dozen bodies, maybe more, scattered across the forest floor. Sarah turned away, retching into the bushes. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a tragic accident or even a single act of violence. This was something much worse, a dumping ground, a killing field. "We need to get out of here," Sarah gasped, wiping her mouth. "Now?" I nodded, finally snapping out of my shock. We turned to leave, but a sound stopped us in our tracks, a twig snapping, followed by the rustle of leaves. Someone, or something, was coming. Without a word, we dove behind a large fallen tree, pressing ourselves into the damp earth. I could feel Sarah trembling beside me, and I reached out to squeeze her hand, as much to comfort myself as her. 2 men entered the clearing, their hushed voices carrying clearly in the still air. They were dressed in hunting gear, but the rifles they carried weren't any kind of hunting weapons I'd ever seen. Military grade, with scopes and suppressors. "Boss ain't gonna be happy," one of them growled. "Told us to clean this place up weeks ago." The other spat on the ground. "Ain't our fault the ground's too hard to dig. Besides, animals usually take care of most of it." I felt Sarah stiffen beside me, and I knew she was fighting the urge to be sick again. I couldn't blame her. The casual way these men discussed the disposal of human remains made my skin crawl. "Well, we better get to it," the first man said. "Don't want anyone stumbling across this place." Too late, I thought grimly. As the men began their grisly task, Sarah and I stayed hidden, hardly daring to breathe. Hours seemed to pass, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, the men finished whatever they'd come to do and left the clearing. We waited until we could no longer hear their footsteps before cautiously emerging from our hiding spot. The clearing looked different now, fewer visible bones, more freshly turned earth. They'd been burying the remains. "We have to tell someone," Sarah whispered, her face pale but determined. I nodded, but as I reached for my phone again, a horrible realization hit me. No signal, I muttered, showing her the screen. Mine neither, she said, checking her own device. What do we do? The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. We were miles from the main trail, in a part of the park we'd never been before. And somewhere out there were two men with high-powered rifles who wouldn't hesitate to add us to their body count if they found us. We need to get back to our campsite, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We can hike out first thing in the morning and alert the authorities. Sarah nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Neither of us said it, but we were both thinking the same thing. Would we even make it through the night? The trek back to our campsite was tense. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made us freeze, certain we were about to be discovered. By the time we reached our tent, night had fallen completely, and an eerie silence had descended on the forest. We didn't bother with a fire that night, too afraid of drawing attention to ourselves. Instead, we huddled in our tent, jumping at every sound. Sleep was impossible. We spent the night in whispered conversation, trying to make sense of what we'd seen and planning our escape at first light. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, we quickly packed up our campsite, leaving no trace of our presence. We hit the trail hard, pushing ourselves to hike faster than we ever had before. Every passing hiker, every park employee we saw filled us with a mixture of relief and terror. Were they innocent bystanders, or part of whatever sinister operation we'd uncovered? It wasn't until we reached the ranger station near the park entrance that we finally felt safe enough to tell our story. The rangers listened with growing concern, immediately calling in state police and FBI. We spent hours recounting every detail, looking at maps to pinpoint the location of the clearing. In the days that followed, our worst fears were confirmed. The authorities found the site exactly where we'd described it. The body count was even higher than we'd thought, at least 30 victims, possibly more. The investigation revealed a complex operation involving human trafficking and organ harvesting, with tentacles reaching far beyond the park's borders. Sarah and I were hailed as heroes for uncovering the operation, but it didn't feel like a victory. The nightmares started almost immediately, visions of bones reaching out from the earth, of shadowy figures with rifles pursuing us through endless forests. We both started therapy, trying to process the trauma of what we'd witnessed. We never went camping again. The thought of being in a remote area, away from help, was too terrifying to contemplate. Our jobs suffered as we struggled with PTSD, and eventually, our marriage crumbled under the weight of our shared trauma. Years have passed, and I'd like to say I've moved on. In many ways, I have. I've rebuilt my life, found a new career, even started dating again. But there are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, the image of that first bone we found seared into my mind. And sometimes, when I'm walking through a park or a wooded area, I'll catch a glimpse of something white amongst the leaves. My heart will stop for a moment, and I'll be right back in that clearing, surrounded by death and unspeakable evil. I know now that there are darker things in this world than I ever imagined. That beneath the beauty of nature, terrible secrets can lie hidden, and that sometimes a simple hike can lead you down a path from which you can never truly return. The moment I stepped into that empty house, I knew something was off. Maybe it was the way the floorboards creaked under my feet, or the musty smell that hung in the air like a forgotten secret. But as I followed the realtor deeper into the sprawling Victorian, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. If only I'd listened to my instincts, I might have avoided the nightmare that was about to unfold. I'd been house hunting for weeks, desperate to find a place I could afford in this overpriced market. When I saw the listing for this old Victorian on the outskirts of town, it seemed too good to be true. The price was well below market value, and the photos showed a house with good bones, just in need of a little TLC. I should have known better. In real estate, as in life, if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. The realtor, a man named Frank, had been oddly insistent on showing me the house that day. He'd called me 3 times that morning, urging me to come see it before someone else snatched it up. In hindsight, his eagerness should have been a red flag, but I was too excited about the prospect of finally finding my dream home to notice. As we walked through the house, Frank kept up a constant stream of chatter, pointing out original features and glossing over the obvious signs of neglect. I tried to focus on the potential of the space, imagining how it could look with a fresh coat of paint and some updated fixtures, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't until we reached the attic that things took a turn for the truly bizarre. Frank had been leading the way up the narrow stairs, still talking about the house's unique charm, when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. I nearly bumped into him, caught off guard by his abrupt halt. "Is everything okay?" I asked, peering around him to see what had caused the interruption. Frank didn't respond. He just stood there, rigid, staring at something I couldn't see. Then, slowly, he turned to face me. The change in his demeanor was shocking. Gone was the friendly, over-eager salesman. In his place was someone, or something, else entirely. His eyes were different, somehow darker and more intense. When he spoke, his voice had a gravelly quality that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about? You invited me." A cruel smile spread across his face. "Oh, I invited you all right, but not for the reasons you think." I turned to run, but Frank was faster. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength, his fingers digging into my flesh. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. In that moment, pure terror took over. I lashed out, my free hand connecting with Frank's jaw. The impact surprised him enough to loosen his grip, and I took advantage of the moment to wrench myself free. I stumbled down the attic stairs, nearly falling in my haste to escape. I could hear Frank behind me, his footsteps heavy on the old wooden steps. I ran through the house, my earlier tour now serving as a mental map as I sought the quickest way out. But as I reached the front door, my heart sank. It was locked, and not with any lock I recognized. The door seemed to have fused shut, as if the house itself was conspiring to keep me trapped. Panic rising in my throat, I turned to the windows, but they too were sealed, the glass unnaturally strong as I pounded against it with all my strength. I was trapped. Frank's laughter echoed through the house, growing closer. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he called out. "This house has been waiting for someone like you for a very long time." I ran from room to room, desperately seeking a way out. But every potential escape route was blocked. It was as if the house was shifting around me, corridors lengthening, doors disappearing. I found myself in the kitchen, cornered, as Frank's footsteps grew ever closer. Frantically, I searched for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a heavy cast-iron skillet just as Frank appeared in the doorway. But the man, if he could still be called that, standing before me barely resembled the realtor I'd met earlier. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, his features twisted into something inhuman, and his eyes were completely black, like empty voids. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Frank, or the thing wearing Frank's face, grinned, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "I am the caretaker," it said in a voice that seemed to echo from somewhere deep and dark. "And you, my dear, are the sacrifice this house has been waiting for." It lunged at me, moving with impossible speed. I swung the skillet with all my might, connecting with its head with a sickening crunch. The thing that had been Frank staggered back, black ichor oozing from the wound. But it didn't fall. Instead, it laughed, a sound that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. "Oh, you're a fighter," it said, sounding almost pleased. "Good. That will make this so much more enjoyable." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran past it, ducking under its grasping arms and fleeing back into the maze-like corridors of the house. I could hear it behind me, its laughter mixing with the creaking and groaning of the house around me. As I ran, I noticed changes in the house. The wallpaper seemed to writhe, patterns shifting and morphing into grotesque faces that leered at me as I passed. The floorboards beneath my feet felt soft and yielding, as if I was running on flesh rather than wood. The very air felt thick and oppressive, making each breath a struggle. I found myself back in the entryway, facing the unyielding front door. But this time, I noticed something I'd overlooked before, a small table with a drawer. Acting on instinct, I yanked the drawer open. Inside was a single key, ancient and rusted. Behind me, I could hear the caretaker approaching, its footsteps unnaturally heavy. With shaking hands, I inserted the key into the lock. For a heart-stopping moment, it wouldn't turn. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the lock clicked open. I threw the door open and burst out into the sunlight, gulping in the fresh air. But my relief was short-lived. As I turned to look back at the house, I saw it changing before my eyes. The quaint Victorian was transforming, growing and twisting into something monstrous. Windows became gaping maws. The porch steps elongated into a lolling tongue. The entire structure seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. And there, in what had been the doorway, stood the caretaker. It made no move to follow me beyond the threshold, but its black eyes bored into me with an intensity that made my soul shrivel. "You may have escaped today," it said, its voice now a chorus of 1,000 tormented souls. "But the house remembers, and it will be waiting." With those final chilling words, the door slammed shut. In an instant, the house returned to its original appearance, just an old, somewhat run-down Victorian. But I knew the truth of what lurked behind that innocent facade. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, and my legs felt like they would give out. I ran until I reached the busy streets of town, where the normality of everyday life felt like a shock to my system. In the days that followed, I tried to report what had happened, but the police found nothing unusual about the house. Frank, the real Frank, was found safe at home, with no memory of ever showing me the property. The listing for the house disappeared from all real estate websites, as if it had never existed. I've moved far away since then, to a small apartment in a busy city where I'm never alone. But I can't shake the memory of that day, or the caretaker's final words. Sometimes, in my dreams, I find myself back in that house, running through endless corridors as the walls close in around me. And always, I hear that chilling laughter echoing in the darkness. I know now that there are places in this world that aren't meant for us. Houses that hunger for more than just inhabitants. And I live with the constant fear that one day, when I least expect it, I'll turn a corner and find myself facing that old Victorian once again. Because the house remembers. And it's waiting. The graffiti on the wall seemed to shimmer in the beam of my flashlight, spelling out a warning that made my blood run cold. Get out while you still can. I turned to share my discovery with my friends, but the words died in my throat as I realized I was alone. The abandoned building, which had moments ago echoed with our excited chatter and laughter, was now eerily silent. And somewhere in the darkness, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. It had started as a dare, a way to break up the monotony of another boring Saturday night in our small town. There were 5 of us, me, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend Mia, and our classmates Chris and Sarah. We'd heard rumors about the old Blackwood factory on the outskirts of town, how it was haunted by the ghosts of workers who had died in a tragic accident decades ago. None of us really believed in ghosts, but the thrill of exploring a forbidden place was too tempting to resist. We'd waited until well after midnight before making our move, parking Jake's beat-up Corolla a block away and sneaking through a hole in the chain-link fence surrounding the property. The factory loomed before us, a hulking silhouette against the star-studded sky. Windows like dead eyes stared down at us, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of apprehension. But then Jake made a joke about horror movie cliches, and we all laughed, the tension broken. The interior of the factory was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing glimpses of a bygone era, faded motivational posters, ancient time clocks, assembly lines frozen in time. We moved deeper into the building, our excitement growing with each new discovery. It was Chris who first noticed something odd. "Hey guys," he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Does anyone else feel like, I don't know, like we're being watched?" We all paused, looking around nervously. Now that he mentioned it, there was a prickle at the back of my neck, a sensation of unseen eyes upon us. But I shook it off, not wanting to seem scared in front of my friends. "It's just your imagination, dude," I said, trying to sound confident. "This place is creepy, but it's empty. We're the only ones here." How wrong I was. We continued our exploration, eventually finding our way to what must have been the factory's main office. Unlike the rest of the building, which was thick with dust and cobwebs, this room looked used. There were fresh footprints in the dust on the floor, and a half-empty water bottle sat on the desk. "Guys," Mia whispered, her eyes wide, "I don't think we're alone here." Before anyone could respond, we heard it, a door slamming somewhere in the distance, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps. Panic set in immediately. We scrambled to turn off our flashlights, plunging ourselves into darkness. I could hear my friends' ragged breathing, feel the tension radiating off them in waves. "We need to get out of here," Jake hissed. "Now." We crept out of the office, moving as quietly as we could. But in our haste to escape, we must have taken a wrong turn. Instead of finding our way back to the entrance, we found ourselves in a part of the factory we hadn't seen before. The air here was different, stale and tinged with an odor I couldn't quite place. That's when we saw the first signs that something was very, very wrong. Scattered across the floor were personal belongings, backpacks, phones, even a shoe. It looked like people had fled in a hurry, leaving everything behind. "What the hell?" Chris muttered, bending down to examine a phone. "This is recent. The batteries still got charge." A sound from behind us made us all jump. Footsteps, closer now, and voices, low, urgent whispers that didn't sound friendly. "Run!" Sarah yelled, and we did. We scattered, each of us fleeing in a different direction. In retrospect, it was the worst thing we could have done. But fear doesn't leave much room for rational thought. I found myself alone in a corridor I didn't recognize, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. That's when I saw the graffiti, the warning that made my blood run cold. And now here I was, alone and terrified, with those footsteps drawing ever closer. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, a voice, rough, male, and definitely not one of my friends. "I know you're here, kid. Come on out. We don't want to hurt you." I didn't believe that for a second. My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this nightmare. I thought about my friends, wondering if they had managed to escape or if they were in the same situation I was. The beam of a flashlight swept past my hiding spot, and I held my breath. It passed by once, twice, and then on the third pass, it stopped. I looked up into the face of a man I'd never seen before. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a face lined by hard living and eyes that were cold and calculating. "Found you," he said, his mouth twisting into a humorless smile. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I ducked under his outstretched arm and took off down the corridor, adrenaline lending me speed I didn't know I possessed. I could hear him behind me, shouting for others to cut me off. I ran blindly, taking turns at random, praying I would find a way out. And then, miraculously, I saw it, a sliver of moonlight peeking through a cracked door. Freedom was just steps away, but as I reached for the door, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with brutal force. I spun around, coming face to face with my pursuer. Up close, I could see the desperation in his eyes, the look of a cornered animal. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Before I could respond, a scream echoed through the building, high-pitched and terrified. I recognized that voice. It was Sarah. The man's grip on my arm loosened for just a moment, his head turning towards the sound. It was all the opening I needed. I wrenched my arm free and shoved him as hard as I could. He stumbled back, caught off guard, and I used that moment to wrench the door open and burst out into the night. The cool air hit me like a slap to the face, jolting me fully into awareness. I ran across the overgrown parking lot, my legs burning with the effort. I didn't stop until I reached the fence, scrambling through the hole we'd used to enter what felt like a lifetime ago. Only when I was a block away did I finally slow down, gasping for breath. I looked back at the factory, half expecting to see my pursuer emerging from the shadows, but the building stood silent and dark, giving no hint of the horrors it contained. I wanted to go back for my friends, Yao, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. What could I do against whoever, or whatever, was in there? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, questioning, and tearful reunions. Jake and Mia had managed to escape shortly after me. Chris was found hiding in a supply closet, terrified but unharmed. But Sarah was gone. The police searched the factory top to bottom, but found no trace of her. They did, however, find evidence of long-term habitation, bedrolls, food supplies, and disturbingly, a room filled with computer equipment and stacks of fake IDs. We later learned that the factory had been serving as a base of operations for a human trafficking ring. Our ill-fated exploration had inadvertently disrupted their operation, leading to that terrifying chase. Sarah's disappearance haunts me to this day. I can't help but wonder, if we had stuck together, if we hadn't run in different directions, would she be safe now? The guilt is a constant companion, as ever-present as the nightmares that jolt me awake most nights. I've learned since then that the world is full of dark places, that evil can lurk behind the most ordinary facades. That abandoned building wasn't haunted by ghosts, but by something far worse, the darkness that lives in the hearts of men. Sometimes, when I drive past the old factory, now demolished and replaced by a strip mall, I think I can still hear echoes of that night. The sound of running footsteps, of desperate breathing, of a scream cut terrifyingly short. And I'm reminded that some dares aren't worth taking, that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because sometimes, when you go looking for a thrill, you find something far more terrifying than you ever bargained for. And the price of that discovery can be higher than you're willing to pay. The first drop of rain hit my windshield like a bad omen. Within seconds, the sky opened up, unleashing a deluge that reduced visibility to near zero. I cursed under my breath, squinting through the windshield wipers. Frantic dance. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. In that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I pulled over. I'd been driving for hours, making my way across the vast expanse of rural Texas. The monotony of the landscape had long since blurred into an endless sea of scrubland and distant mesas. My destination was a job interview in El Paso, a last-ditch effort to turn my life around after a series of setbacks. The rain had started about an hour ago, a light drizzle that quickly intensified into this biblical downpour. I'd been debating whether to pull over and wait it out when I spotted the hitchhiker. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and tall, with a weather-beaten face partially obscured by a thick beard. As I pulled to a stop beside him, I could see the gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you kindly," he said as he climbed into the passenger seat. "Thought I might drown out there." I nodded, trying to ignore the twinge of unease in my gut. "Where you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. "West," he replied. "Got family in New Mexico." We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic thump of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. I stole glances at my passenger, noting his tattered clothes and the way his eyes seemed to dart around, never quite settling on anything. "Name's John," he said suddenly, startling me. "John Hawkins." "Dave," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. "Nice to meet you, John." More silence. The unease in my stomach grew. Something about John felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe I was just being paranoid. "Mind if we stop at the next gas station?" John asked. "Nature calls, if you know what I mean." I nodded, relieved at the prospect of a brief respite from the tension in the car. A few miles down the road, I spotted a sign for a gas station and pulled off the highway. The station was a dilapidated affair, a relic from a bygone era. A flickering neon sign proclaimed it open, though the place looked like it had seen better days. I pulled up to one of the pumps, grateful for the chance to stretch my legs. "I'll just be a minute," John said, climbing out of the car and heading towards the small convenience store attached to the station. I watched him go, then got out to pump some gas. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the air felt heavy with moisture. As I stood there, nozzle in hand, a police cruiser pulled into the station, its lights flashing. My heart rate picked up. Had I been speeding without realizing it? But the officer didn't approach me. Instead, he got out of his car and headed into the store. Moments later, I heard shouting. The officer emerged, dragging John in handcuffs. Our eyes met, and I saw something in John's gaze that chilled me to the bone, a mixture of rage and hunger. The officer approached me, his face grim. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." In a daze, I followed him into the store. The elderly clerk behind the counter looked shaken, his eyes wide with fear. "You picked up this man on the highway?" the officer asked. I nodded, my mouth dry. "You're lucky," he said, his voice low. "This man is wanted in connection with a string of murders across 3 states. He preys on good Samaritans, people kind enough to offer him a ride." The blood drained from my face as the implications of what he was saying sank in. I thought about the long, lonely stretch of highway we'd been on, about how easily John could have overpowered me. "We've been tracking him for weeks," the officer continued. "Got a tip he was headed this way. When the clerk recognized him from the wanted posters and called us, well, let's just say you dodged a bullet." I sat heavily on a nearby chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins gave way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions and statements. I learned that John Hawkins, if that was even his real name, was suspected in the deaths of at least 7 people. All of them had been found brutally murdered, their vehicles abandoned in remote areas. As I sat in the small office of the gas station giving my statement to a detective, I couldn't shake the image of John's eyes in that final moment. The mask of grateful hitchhiker had slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "You said he asked you to stop here?" the detective asked, his pen poised over a notepad. I nodded. "Said he needed to use the restroom." The detective exchanged a look with his partner. "We found a knife in the restroom. Brand new. Looks like he was planning to make his move here." A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought about how close I'd come to being another statistic, another body found in a ditch. It was well past midnight by the time they finally let me go. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean. As I climbed back into my car, I noticed John's scent still lingered, a mixture of sweat and something metallic that I now realized might have been blood. I drove through the night, sleep the furthest thing from my mind. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror made me flinch, every shadowy figure on the side of the road a potential threat. When I finally reached El Paso, the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. I checked into a motel, my interview long forgotten. As I lay on the lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed every moment of my encounter with John. Had there been signs I'd missed? Could I have sensed the danger lurking behind his friendly demeanor? Or had I just been incredibly, unbelievably lucky? In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at shadows, seeing threats in every stranger's smile. I missed my interview, lost the opportunity for the job that had seemed so important just days before, but I was alive, and that felt like a miracle in itself. The trial came months later. I sat in the courtroom, listening to the horrific details of John's crimes. I learned about the lives he'd taken, the families he'd destroyed, and all the while, he sat there, emotionless, those same hungry eyes scanning the courtroom as if searching for his next victim. When it was my turn to testify, I felt his gaze boring into me. I recounted our brief time together, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to remain calm. As I spoke, I realized how close I'd come to being just another chapter in the prosecutor's litany of horrors. The guilty verdict brought a sense of closure, but not peace. I still found myself hesitating to help strangers, my natural inclination to offer assistance now warring with a newfound caution. Years have passed since that rainy night in Texas. I've moved on, built a new life for myself. But I've never forgotten John Hawkins or the lesson I learned on that lonely stretch of highway. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see a hitchhiker on the side of the road, I feel a flutter of panic in my chest. I think about John, about the monster hiding behind the mask of a grateful stranger. And I keep driving, my doors locked and my eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. Because I've learned that sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones that look just like us. They prey on our kindness, our willingness to help, and in a world where such dangers exist, even the simplest act of compassion can have deadly consequences. So I drive on, alone but alive, carrying with me the weight of what might have been and the knowledge that sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under our beds or in our closets. Sometimes they're sitting right beside us, thumb outstretched, waiting for someone kind enough or foolish enough to stop. The ski lift groaned to a halt, leaving me suspended high above the snow-covered slopes. As the wind picked up, whistling through the bare trees, I felt the first tendrils of dread creep up my spine. Something moved in the forest below, a dark shape darting between the pines. That's when I realized I wasn't alone on this mountain, and whatever was down there was hunting me. I'd always loved skiing, the rush of adrenaline as you hurtle down a mountain, the crisp air biting at your cheeks, the sense of freedom that comes with being surrounded by nature's untamed beauty. But this solo trip to a remote ski resort in the Colorado Rockies was about more than just hitting the slopes. It was about finding myself again after a brutal year that had seen the end of my marriage and the loss of a job I'd once loved. The resort was small, family-owned, and off the beaten path, perfect for someone looking to escape the crowds and find some solitude. I'd arrived late the previous evening, checking into a cozy cabin on the outskirts of the property. The elderly couple who ran the place had been warm and welcoming, though I'd noticed an odd exchange of glances when I mentioned I was here alone. "Just be sure to get back before dark," the woman had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The mountain can be unpredictable at night." I'd brushed off her concern, attributing it to the overprotectiveness of a small-town local, worried about a city slicker like me. Now, as I dangled in the growing twilight, her words came back to haunt me. The day had started perfectly, blue skies, fresh powder, and virtually empty runs. I'd spent hours carving my way down the mountain, each run leaving me feeling more alive than the last. As the afternoon wore on, I decided to take one last run before calling it a day. That's when things started to go wrong. First, it was just little things. A ski that kept coming loose, even though I'd checked the bindings a dozen times. The sudden appearance of fog, rolling in thick and fast, obscuring the trail markers. And then, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I'd paused halfway down the mountain, ostensibly to adjust my gear, but really to scan the tree line. That's when I saw it for the first time. A flash of movement, too big to be a deer or fox, too fast and agile to be a bear. Whatever it was keeping pace with me, always just out of clear sight. Heart pounding, I'd pushed off, abandoning any pretense of enjoying the run. Now it was about getting back to the base as quickly as possible, but in my haste and growing panic, I must have taken a wrong turn. The trail became unfamiliar, steeper and rougher than anything I'd encountered earlier, and then the ski lift. My last hope of a quick escape back to safety, except now it had stopped, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. The wind picked up again, rocking the chair. I gripped the safety bar tighter, my gloved hands slick with nervous sweat inside. The darkness below seemed to shift and move, and I couldn't tell if it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes, or if there really was something down there, circling, waiting. A howl pierced the air, long and mournful, but with an undercurrent of something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard. It sounded wrong. The lift jerked, dropping a few inches before catching again. I bit back a scream, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the vast whiteness. "Is anyone there? The lift is stuck." Silence, not even an echo. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. And then, an answer, but not the one I was hoping for. Another howl, closer this time, followed by another, and another. A chorus of inhuman voices rising from the forest below. The lift shuddered again, and this time it didn't stop. It began to descend, slowly at first, then picking up speed. For a moment, I felt a flood of relief. The lift was working again. I was going to make it back to the base. But as the ground rushed up to meet me, I realized with horror that this wasn't a controlled descent. The cable had snapped. I had just enough time to take a deep breath before the chair slammed into the snow-covered ground. Pain exploded through my body as I was thrown clear, tumbling down the slope before coming to rest against a tree. For a few moments, I just lay there, dazed and gasping for breath. Every inch of me hurt, but a quick mental inventory suggested nothing was broken. Small mercies. The howls were closer now, mixed with a sound that might have been laughter if it wasn't so chilling. I struggled to my feet, fighting against the pain and the deep snow. One of my skis had come off in the fall. The other was bent at an odd angle, useless. I started to move downhill, hoping against hope that I was going in the right direction. The fog was thicker now, limiting visibility to just a few feet in any direction. The sun had set, leaving only the faint glow of twilight to illuminate my way. Something crashed through the underbrush behind me. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about stealth or caution. Pure animal instinct had taken over. Run or die. I ran, or tried to. The deep snow and my injuries made every step a struggle. I could hear them behind me, getting closer. The sounds they made weren't quite animal, weren't quite human. They were something in between, and all the more terrifying for it. A clearing appeared ahead, and I made for it, hoping for better footing, a landmark, anything that might help me orient myself. Instead, I found myself on the edge of a frozen lake, the ice disappearing into the fog. I turned, ready to find another way, but it was too late. They were here. They emerged from the trees like nightmares given flesh, vaguely human in shape, but twisted wrong. Fur sprouted in patches across gray skin. Their faces were a horrifying mix of human and wolf, with glowing eyes that fixed on me with predatory intent. I backed away, my feet slipping on the icy shore. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it was useless. These creatures weren't interested in pleas or bargains. The largest of them, a massive brute with a mangled ear, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was a guttural growl that somehow formed words. "Welcome, little ski," it said, lips pulling back to reveal yellowed fangs. "We've been waiting for you." I took another step back, feeling the ice creak beneath my feet. The creature's eyes widened, a flash of what might have been fear crossing its inhuman features. "Careful," it growled. "The ice." But it was too late. With a terrible crack, the surface gave way beneath me. I plunged into the freezing water, the shock driving the air from my lungs. As I sank into the dark depths, I caught one last glimpse of the world above. The creatures stood at the edge of the broken ice, their howls muffled by the water in my ears. They made no move to save me. Perhaps they couldn't. Perhaps the ice was their boundary, the line they couldn't cross. The cold wrapped around me like a blanket, and I felt myself starting to drift. As my vision began to fade, a strange sense of peace came over me. At least here, in the quiet dark, I was beyond their reach. My last conscious thought was of the old woman at the resort, her cryptic warning, the mountain, unpredictable at night. If only I'd listened. I don't know how long I was under. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning in that frigid blackness. But somehow, against all odds, I survived. I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and concerned faces. They told me a search party had found me washed up on the shore of the lake, barely alive. Hypothermia, they said. Hallucinations brought on by the cold and trauma. But I know what I saw. I know what chased me through that forest. And I know that somewhere out there in the remote wilderness of the Rockies, they're still waiting. Watching. Hungry. I don't ski anymore. I don't go to the mountains at all if I can help it. But sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself listening, wondering. And I thank whatever twist of fate allowed me to escape that frozen hell, because I know that for every story like mine, for every lucky survivor who makes it back to tell the tale, there are dozens more who disappear into the wilderness, never to be seen again, claimed by the mountain and the monsters that call it home. The air in the apartment building felt heavy, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I climbed the stairs to the third floor, a sense of unease grew with each step. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. It wasn't until I reached my door and saw the strange symbols carved into the wood that I realized my neighbors weren't just eccentric, they were something far more sinister. I'd moved into the Rosewood Apartments just 3 months ago, drawn by the affordable rent and the charming, if slightly rundown, Art Deco architecture. The building was old, with creaky floors and temperamental plumbing, but it had character. And after a messy breakup and the loss of my job, it was all I could afford. From the start, I'd noticed that my neighbors were a bit odd. Mrs. Abernathy in 3B always wore a heavy black veil, even in the sweltering heat of summer. The twins in 3C never seemed to leave their apartment, but I could hear them chanting in a language I didn't recognize at all hours of the night. And Mr. Kovacs in 3A, well, I tried not to think too hard about the strange smells that often wafted from under his door. But I'd chalked it up to big city eccentricity. After all, this was New York. Everyone had their quirks. Right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. It started with small things. Items in my apartment moving when I wasn't looking. Strange whispers in the hallway that stopped as soon as I opened my door. The constant feeling of being watched, even when I was alone in my studio. Then came the dreams. Vivid nightmares filled with twisted figures and impossible geometries. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the echo of inhuman voices still ringing in my ears. I tried to rationalize it all. Stress from job hunting, lingering depression from the breakup, maybe even a gas leak. But deep down, I knew it was something more. The day everything changed started like any other. I'd been out dropping off resumes, trying to ignore the growing dread that had become my constant companion. As I climbed the stairs to my floor, that feeling of wrongness intensified. And then I saw the door. The symbols carved into the wood were like nothing I'd ever seen before. They seemed to shift and writhe as I looked at them, making my eyes water and my head spin. A faint glow emanated from the carvings, pulsing in time with my rapidly beating heart. I fumbled for my keys, desperate to get inside and away from whatever madness was happening in the hallway. But as I inserted the key into the lock, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, coming face to face with Mrs. Abernathy. Her veil was pulled back, revealing a face that was both ancient and somehow ageless. Her eyes, I noticed with a jolt of terror, were completely black. "It's time, dear," she said, her voice carrying an echo of something vast and unknowable. "We've waited so long for you to be ready." Before I could react, before I could run or scream or do anything at all, the door behind me swung open. Hands grabbed me, pulling me into my apartment. Except it wasn't my apartment anymore. The small studio had transformed into a vast, cavernous space. The walls seemed to stretch into infinity, covered in the same writhing symbols I'd seen on the door. In the center of the room stood a circle of robed figures, my neighbors, I realized with dawning horror. Mr. Kovach stepped forward, lowering his hood. His face was no longer human, twisted into something that belonged in the depths of the ocean rather than on dry land. "Welcome, chosen one," he gurgled, his voice bubbling as if spoken through water. "We've been waiting centuries for your arrival." I tried to speak, to demand answers or beg for release, but no sound came out. My voice had been stolen, along with my will to move. The twins from 3C began to chant, their voices rising and falling in an eldritch harmony that made my bones vibrate. As they sang, the air in the center of the circle began to shimmer and twist. "The gate is opening," Mrs. Abernathy whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. "Our Lord will be most pleased with this offering." The shimmering air coalesced into a portal, a window into a realm that should not exist. Through it, I could see a landscape of impossible angles and colors that hurt to look at. And something was coming through. A tendril, slick and black and utterly alien, snaked its way out of the portal. It was followed by another, and another, until the room was filled with writhing appendages that seemed to drink in the light. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from this nightmare. But I could only stand there, paralyzed, as the thing from beyond pulled itself into our world. It was vast, filling the impossible space of the room, and then some. It had too many eyes, too many mouths, its form constantly shifting in ways that defied comprehension. And it was hungry. One of its tendrils wrapped around my waist, lifting me off the ground. I felt a scream building in my throat, finally breaking through whatever spell had silenced me. The sound that escaped me wasn't human. It was the wail of a soul confronted with the truth of a universe far more vast and terrifying than it had ever imagined. As the tendril pulled me towards one of its gaping maws, I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end. I thought of my family, my friends, all the normal, everyday things I'd taken for granted, how I wished I could go back to that life of blissful ignorance. But then, something unexpected happened. Another scream joined mine, this one filled with rage and defiance. I opened my eyes to see a new figure burst into the room, wielding what looked like a sword made of pure light. It was the super of our building, Mr. Ramirez. Except he wasn't the paunchy, middle-aged man I'd known. This Mr. Ramirez was younger, his eyes blazing with an inner fire, his movements graceful and deadly. "Release her, spawn of Nyarlathotep," he roared, his voice carrying the weight of command. The creature hesitated, its tendrils loosening slightly. My neighbors hissed and snarled, backing away from this unexpected intruder. Mr. Ramirez didn't wait for a response. He leapt into action, his light sword slicing through tendrils with ease. The creature howled, a sound that threatened to shatter my sanity. I fell to the ground, released from both the creature's grip and whatever spell had held me immobile. Mr. Ramirez was at my side in an instant, helping me to my feet. "Run!" he shouted, pushing me towards the door. "I'll hold them off." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran, my legs carrying me faster than I'd ever moved before. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of battle, inhuman shrieks, the sizzle of that strange light sword, and Mr. Ramirez's defiant yells. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, my lungs burning and my legs trembling. When I finally dared to look back, the Rosewood Apartments looked normal. No eldritch horrors spilling out of the windows, no sign of the cosmic battle I'd just witnessed. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined it all. But the lingering terror in my gut and the faint, acrid smell of other-dimensional energy clinging to my clothes told me it had been all too real. I never went back to the Rosewood Apartments. I couldn't bear the thought of what I might find, or what might find me. Instead, I fled the city, seeking refuge in the most mundane, normal place I could find. But I know the truth now. I've seen behind the veil of reality, and I can never unsee it. There are things out there, ancient and terrible things, that view our world as nothing more than a staging ground for their cosmic games. And sometimes, when the stars align just right, they reach through the cracks in our reality, seeking pawns for their unfathomable plans. I don't know why I was chosen. I don't know if Mr. Ramirez survived his battle with that eldritch horror. And I certainly don't know if I'm truly safe even now, but I do know this. The next time you're looking for an apartment, pay close attention to your potential neighbors. Because you never know when that eccentric old lady next door might be the high priestess of an otherworldly cult. And if you ever see strange symbols carved into your door, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because once you've been marked as a chosen one, there's no telling what horrors might come calling. The convenience store's neon sign flickered in the darkness, a beacon of light in the middle of nowhere. As I pulled into the empty parking lot, exhaustion clouding my vision, I had no idea that this pit stop would be the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. If I had known what awaited me inside, I would have kept driving, no matter how heavy my eyelids felt. I'd been on the road for nearly 15 hours straight, pushing through the night on a cross-country move from Boston to San Diego. The promise of a new job and a fresh start had me eager to reach my destination, but as the miles stretched on, fatigue began to take its toll. When I spotted the sign for Joe's Gas Grub, just off the highway in what seemed like the middle of the New Mexico desert, it felt like a godsend. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over rows of snacks and drinks. Behind the counter, an old man dozed in a chair, his chin resting on his chest. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice hoarse from hours of disuse. "Hello?" The old man stirred, blinking owlishly at me. For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Fear, resignation, before being replaced by a bland smile. "Welcome to Joe's," he said, his voice gravelly. "What can I do for you?" I grabbed a coffee and some snacks, making small talk as he rang me up. As I turned to leave, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Be careful out there," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "The night has teeth in these parts." I laughed nervously, chalking it up to small-town superstition. If only I had listened. Back in my car, I sipped the bitter coffee and pulled back onto the highway. The caffeine began to work its magic, clearing some of the fog from my mind. That's when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it. another night owl making their way across the vast emptiness of the American Southwest. But as the minutes ticked by and the car maintained a constant distance behind me, a seed of unease began to grow in my gut. I sped up, pushing my old sedan harder than I had all night. The headlights kept pace effortlessly. I slowed down, hoping they would pass. Instead, they slowed too, maintaining that same eerie distance. My palms began to sweat as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I was being followed. That much was clear. But why? And by whom? I fumbled for my phone, intending to call 911 only to find no signal. Of course, I was in the middle of nowhere, cut off from help. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark. No exits, no towns, nothing but miles of asphalt and desert scrub. I was trapped, a mouse in a very long, straight maze, with something hungry nipping at my heels. Suddenly, the headlights behind me flared brightly, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw with horror that the car was now much closer, close enough that I could make out details of the driver. What I saw made my blood run cold. The figure behind the wheel wasn't human. Its head was too large, its eyes too wide and dark. As it grinned at me through the windshield, I saw rows of needle-sharp teeth. I screamed, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The engine roared in protest as I pushed it to its limits, the speedometer climbing past 100, 110, 120. But no matter how fast I went, those terrible headlights stayed right behind me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I hallucinating from lack of sleep? Had someone slipped something into my coffee back at the gas station? Or was this real? Was I really being chased by something that shouldn't exist? A sign flashed by. Rest stop 1 mile. I made a split-second decision. Maybe I could lose them there, find help, or at least a place to hide. I took the exit at speeds that sent my car fishtailing, tires screeching in protest. The rest stop came into view, a small building with restrooms and vending machines, a few picnic tables, and a large parking area. It was deserted. I skidded to a stop and leapt out of the car, adrenaline overriding my exhaustion. As I ran for the building, I risked a glance back. The other car had stopped at the entrance to the rest area. Its headlights went dark, and for a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe it wouldn't follow me here. That hope died as I saw the door open and the driver step out. In the harsh glow of the parking lot lights, I could see it clearly now. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and jointed in ways that defied anatomy. Its skin was a sickly gray, seeming to shift and ripple as if alive. And its face, God, its face. Where there should have been features, there was only a mass of writhing tentacles surrounding those terrible, black eyes. It began to move towards me, each step covering an impossible distance. I turned and ran, slamming through the door of the rest stop building. Inside, I found myself in a small lobby area. Vending machines hummed in one corner, their light creating strange shadows. 2 hallways led off to what I assumed were the restrooms. I didn't have time to think. I could hear it outside, its footsteps echoing on the pavement. I dove into the women's restroom, locking myself in a stall and climbing up onto the toilet to hide my feet. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the main door creaked open. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed off the tiled floor. It was in here with me. A low, gurgling sound filled the air. Not quite a growl, not quite speech, but something in between. It was calling for me, I realized, hunting me. The footsteps grew closer. I saw shadows move under the stall door. It was right outside. I closed my eyes, silently praying to any god that might be listening. Please, please, don't let it find me. The stall door rattled. Once, twice. On the third shake, the lock gave way. I opened my eyes to find myself staring into the abyss of the creature's gaze. This close, I could smell it. a scent of ozone and decay that made my stomach churn. Its tentacles writhed, reaching for me. I screamed, lashing out with all the strength fear and desperation gave me. My fist connected with something solid, and the creature reeled back, more in surprise than pain. I took my chance. I bolted past it, out of the stall, out of the restroom. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning, my legs pumping furiously. I burst out of the rest stop and into the parking lot. My car was there, engine still running, door still open. Behind me, I heard an inhuman shriek of rage. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the car into gear. Tires squealing, I peeled out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. For hours, I drove, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. But the creature and its car were gone. As dawn broke, painting the desert in hues of pink and gold, I finally allowed myself to relax a fraction. I never saw the creature again, but I never forgot it either. The memory of that night haunts me still, surfacing in nightmares that leave me gasping and drenched in sweat. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was just an exhaustion-induced hallucination. Maybe someone slipped something into my drink at that gas station. But deep down, I know the truth. There are things out there, in the vast emptiness of the American night, that defy explanation. Things that hunt lone travelers on dark highways. Things with teeth and tentacles and hunger. So if you ever find yourself driving through the desert in the dead of night, and you see a convenience store glowing like a beacon in the darkness, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need that coffee or those snacks, keep driving. Because the night has teeth, and once it gets a taste of you, it never lets go. The first time I heard the scratching in the walls, I dismissed it as mice. But as I pressed my ear against the cool plaster, listening to the rhythmic scraping growing louder and more frantic, a chilling realization washed over me. Whatever was moving inside the walls of my Airbnb was far too big to be a rodent, and it was getting closer. I'd booked the quaint Victorian house for a month-long writing retreat, desperate to finish my novel away from the distractions of city life. The listing had promised an historic charm and peaceful seclusion, situated on the outskirts of a small New England town I'd never heard of. The price was surprisingly reasonable for such a large space, but I chalked it up to the off-season and my luck at finding a hidden gem. When I arrived, the house seemed perfect. 3 stories of weathered clapboard siding, gingerbread trim, and a turret that would serve as my writing nook. The interior was a time capsule of 19th century design, from the elaborately carved banisters to the heavy velvet drapes. Sure, there was a musty smell that lingered despite open windows, and some of the floorboards creaked ominously, but it all added to the atmosphere I was seeking for my gothic horror novel. The first few days passed uneventfully. I settled into a routine, writing from dawn until dusk, breaking only for quick meals and short walks around the overgrown gardens. The words flowed easily, inspired by my surroundings. I felt like I was finally making progress after months of writer's block. It was on the 4th night that I first heard the scratching. I was up late, poring over my notes in the turret room, when a faint sound caught my attention. At first, I thought it was tree branches scraping against the side of the house, but as I listened closer, I realized it was coming from inside the wall beside me. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper, its faded pattern cool against my skin. The scratching was clearer now, a steady rhythm punctuated by occasional pauses. It seemed to be moving, traveling up the wall towards the ceiling. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stepped back, heart racing. Mice, I told myself. Old houses always have mice. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that mice don't move like that, don't scratch with such purpose. I tried to shake off the unease and return to my writing, but the words wouldn't come. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, had me on edge. I finally gave up and went to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a child afraid of the dark. The next day, I explored the house more thoroughly, looking for signs of rodents or any explanation for the strange noises. I found nothing, not even a single dropping or gnaw mark. What I did find, hidden behind a loose panel in the attic, was a journal. The leather-bound book was old, its pages yellow and brittle. The handwriting inside was spidery and difficult to read, but as I deciphered the entries, my blood ran cold. It was the diary of a previous owner, dating back to the late 1800s. The writer described hearing noises in the walls, seeing shadows move out of the corner of their eye, feeling watched even when alone in the house. As the entries progressed, the writer's mental state seemed to deteriorate. They wrote of hidden passages they couldn't find, of voices whispering from empty rooms, of something living within the very bones of the house. The final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, simply read, "They're coming for me. God help me. They're coming through the walls." I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking. It had to be the ramblings of a madman, I told myself. There was no other explanation. But as I looked around the dim attic, at the shadows lurking in the corners, doubt crept in. That night, the scratching returned, louder than before. It wasn't just in one spot now, but seemed to be all around me, coming from every wall. I huddled in my bed, wide-eyed and trembling, as the sounds grew more frenzied. Then, I heard something new, a low, guttural growl that was decidedly not from any animal I knew. I bolted from the bed, grabbing my phone and car keys. As I raced down the stairs, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. The wallpaper in the hallway was moving, rippling as if something was pushing against it from the other side. I didn't wait to see what would emerge. I ran out of the house, not even bothering to close the door behind me. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the nearest town with a hotel. Only then, in the harsh fluorescent light of a budget motel room, did I allow myself to break down. The next morning, after a fitful sleep plagued by nightmares, I called the Airbnb host. The conversation did nothing to calm my nerves. "Oh dear," the elderly woman said when I described what had happened. "They've woken up again, haven't they?" "What do you mean, woken up?" I demanded. "What's going on in that house?" There was a long pause before she answered. "The house has peculiarities. It's been in my family for generations. Sometimes it sleeps, sometimes it doesn't. We thought it would stay quiet for you." I was speechless. She spoke about the house as if it were alive, as if the horrors I'd experienced were just an inconvenience, like a leaky faucet or a drafty window. "I'll refund your stay, of course," she continued, her tone maddeningly calm. "And I'll make sure the listing is updated to warn future guests." "Warn them," I sputtered. "You shouldn't be renting it out at all. It's dangerous." "Oh, it's not dangerous, dear. Not really. It's just hungry sometimes, but it never takes more than it needs." I hung up, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to report her, to have the house condemned and torn down. But who would believe me? And more importantly, what would happen if they did destroy the house? Would they be releasing whatever was inside? I never went back to collect my things. I bought new clothes, a new laptop, anything to avoid setting foot in that house again. I told myself I was being irrational, that there had to be a logical explanation for everything I'd experienced. But deep down, I knew the truth. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I swear I can hear scratching in the walls of my apartment. It's just the pipes, I tell myself. Just the building settling. But a part of me wonders, did something follow me from that house? Is it waiting, biding its time until it gets hungry again? I finished my novel, but not the one I started in that Victorian nightmare. Instead, I wrote about my experience, pouring all my fear and uncertainty onto the pages. It became a bestseller, praised for its visceral realism and palpable sense of dread. If only my readers knew how real it all was. I still write, but I never stay in Airbnbs anymore. Hotels only, preferably new ones with steel and concrete bones that don't hide secrets in their walls. And every time I check in, I press my ear against the wall, holding my breath, listening for that telltale scratch. Because now I know the truth. Some houses are more than just wood and nails. Some houses hunger. And once you've heard them stirring, you never truly feel safe again. The rusty sign creaked in the wind, its faded letters barely legible. Welcome to Millbrook, population 512. As we drove past it, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. Something about this town felt wrong, fundamentally off in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. Little did I know, that feeling was my last warning before we stumbled into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I had been on the road for hours, making our way from Chicago to her parents' new place in Denver. We'd decided to take the scenic route, eschewing the monotony of the interstate for the charm of backroads and small towns. It had been Sarah's idea to cut through this particular stretch of rural Nebraska, a shortcut she'd found on an obscure travel blog. "It'll be an adventure," she'd said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Who knows what hidden gems we might find? I should have known better. In horror movies, it's always the shortcut that leads to trouble. But real life isn't a movie, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. At first, Millbrook seemed like any other small Midwestern town we'd passed through. A main street lined with mom-and-pop shops, a town square with a gazebo, houses with well-manicured lawns. But as we drove deeper into town, looking for a place to grab lunch, I noticed things that set my nerves on edge. The streets were empty, not just quiet, but completely deserted. No cars, no pedestrians, not even a stray dog. The shops, while seemingly open, had no customers. And the few people we did see through windows or on porches, they just stared. No waves, no smiles, just blank, unblinking stares that followed our car as we passed. "Maybe it's siesta time," Sarah joked, but I could hear the unease in her voice. We pulled up to a diner called Mel's Eats, the only place that showed any signs of life. A neon "open" sign buzzed in the window, and we could see a few patrons inside. "Let's just grab a quick bite and get back on the road," I said, trying to keep the relief out of my voice. Normal people, normal food, then we'd be on our way. The bell above the door chimed as we entered, and every head in the place turned to look at us. The silence was deafening. I could feel their eyes on us as we made our way to a booth, the vinyl seats squeaking uncomfortably loud in the quiet. A waitress approached, her smile too wide, too fixed. "Welcome to Mel's," she said, her voice oddly flat. "You folks aren't from around here, are you?" We shook our heads, and I swear I saw something like hunger flash in her eyes. "Well, you're in for a treat," she continued. "Mel's famous meatloaf is to die for." The way she emphasized "to die for" sent a shiver down my spine. We ordered quickly, sandwiches and sodas, nothing that would take too long to prepare. As the waitress walked away, I leaned in close to Sarah. "Something's not right here," I whispered. "We need to leave as soon as we can." She nodded, her earlier enthusiasm replaced by a look of worry. "I know. I feel it too. It's like everyone's wearing a mask or something." Our food arrived suspiciously quickly, and we ate in tense silence, both of us eager to get back on the road. I couldn't shake the feeling that the other diners were watching us, their heads turned just enough to keep us in sight without openly staring. When the check came, I threw down some cash, not even bothering to count it. "Keep the change," I told the waitress, already halfway out of the booth. But as we stood to leave, a large man blocked our path. He was easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like a linebacker and hands that looked like they could crush stone. "Leaving so soon?" he rumbled, his voice deep and threatening. But the fun's just about to start. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Sarah grabbed my hand and yanked me towards the back of the diner. "Run!" she yelled. We burst through the kitchen doors, startling a cook who was standing unnaturally still over a bubbling pot. The smell coming from it turned my stomach. It was meat, but no meat I'd ever encountered before. We didn't stop to investigate. We ran through the kitchen and out the back door, emerging into an alley behind the diner. I could hear shouts behind us, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. "The car!" Sarah gasped as we ran. "We need to get to the car." But as we rounded the corner onto the main street, my heart sank. Our car was gone. In its place was a group of townspeople, their faces set in those same blank stares we'd seen earlier. But now, those stares held a hunger that made my blood run cold. "This way," I said, pulling Sarah down a side street. We ran blindly, taking turns at random, trying to lose our pursuers. But at every turn, more townspeople appeared, slowly closing in on us. As we ran, I began to notice other details that my mind had initially skipped over. The houses, which had seemed normal at first glance, were subtly wrong. Windows at odd angles, doors too small or too large, colors that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. And the people, the more I looked, the less human they appeared. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized, and their faces, God, their faces, they stretched and distorted as we passed, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. We found ourselves in the town square, the gazebo looming before us. With nowhere else to go, we ran inside, hoping for some kind of shelter. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the world seemed to shift. The sky, which had been a clear blue, turned a sickly green. The buildings around the square twisted and warped, their architecture becoming impossible. Escher-like constructions, and the townspeople, they shed any pretense of humanity, their bodies elongated, limbs bending at impossible angles, their faces melting into grotesque, alien visages. "What's happening?" Sarah screamed, clutching my arm so tight I could feel her nails digging into my skin. Before I could answer, a voice boomed out, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome, travelers," it said, a sound like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the purr of a contented cat. "We've been waiting so long for fresh meat." The thing that had been the waitress from the diner stepped forward, her body now a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes. "You'll join us for dinner, won't you?" she asked, her mouth splitting into a grin that was far too wide, filled with far too many teeth. "As the main course, of course." I looked around desperately for an escape, but we were surrounded. The townspeople, or whatever they really were, had formed a tight circle around the gazebo. There was no way out. Just as I was about to give in to despair, Sarah squeezed my hand. I looked at her, saw the determination in her eyes, and understood. If we were going down, we were going down fighting. We charged forward, catching the creatures off guard. We pushed and shoved our way through the crowd, their inhuman shrieks filling the air. Claws and tentacles grasped at us, tearing our clothes and scratching our skin, but somehow, miraculously, we broke through. We ran like we'd never run before, our feet barely touching the ground. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, as if the creatures couldn't leave the town limits. We didn't stop running until we hit the highway, our lungs burning, legs shaking from exertion. Only then did we dare to look back. Millbrook was gone. In its place was an empty field, with no sign that a town had ever existed there. The only evidence of our ordeal was our torn clothes and the scratches on our skin. We flagged down the first car we saw, a kindly older couple who listened to our breathless, barely coherent story with growing concern. They drove us to the nearest police station, where we spent hours trying to explain what had happened. The police found nothing, of course. No town, no monsters, not even a sign. They chalked it up to some kind of shared hallucination, maybe caused by carbon monoxide poisoning from our car. We knew the truth, but who would believe us? Sarah and I don't take road trips anymore. We stick to plains and well-traveled routes. But sometimes, when we're driving at night and we see a sign for a small town we've never heard of, we share a look of understanding and keep driving. Because we know now that some places aren't meant to be found. Some shortcuts lead to destinations you can never return from. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that wear human faces, waiting in quiet towns for unsuspecting travelers to stumble into their web. So if you're ever on a road trip and you see a sign for a town that's not on your map, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how tempting that shortcut might seem, keep driving. Because you never know when you might end up in a place like Millbrook, where the diner special is always to die for, and they mean that quite literally. The old key felt unnaturally cold in my hand, its intricate design catching the dim light of the attic. As I stood before the locked door that had confounded me for weeks, a mixture of excitement and dread washed over me. I had no idea that turning that key would unlock not just a hidden room, but a nightmare that had been lurking in my family's history for generations. It all started when my great-aunt Mildred passed away, leaving me her sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of a small New England town. I'd only met the old woman a handful of times, and her decision to make me her sole heir came as a shock to everyone, myself included. But as a struggling writer with mounting debts, I wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. The house was a marvel, a 3-story behemoth with turrets, gables, and more rooms than I could count. It was also in desperate need of renovation, with peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, and a pervasive musty smell that seemed to seep from the very walls. I threw myself into the restoration project with gusto, seeing it as both a welcome distraction from my writer's block and a potential goldmine of inspiration for my next novel. Room by room, I cleaned, repaired, and updated, uncovering the house's hidden charms. But there was one door that refused to yield to my efforts. Located at the end of a long hallway on the 3rd floor, it remained stubbornly locked despite my best attempts to open it. None of the keys I'd found in the house worked, and the local locksmith had scratched his head in bewilderment at its peculiar mechanism. "Never seen anything like it," he'd muttered, packing up his tools in defeat. "It's like it's not meant to be opened." His words should have been a warning, but they only fueled my curiosity. What could be so important that it needed such an elaborate lock? What secrets was Aunt Mildred hiding? The breakthrough came when I was sorting through a box of old family photographs in the attic. Tucked between faded sepia prints of stern-faced ancestors was an envelope addressed to me in Aunt Mildred's spidery handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small, ornate key. The letter was brief and cryptic. "Dearest nephew, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and the house is yours. With it comes a responsibility I'd hoped to spare you from, but blood will tell, and the time has come for you to know the truth." The key opens the locked door. What you find there will change everything. Be brave, be strong, and above all, be careful. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Your loving aunt, Mildred. And now here I stood, key in hand, heart pounding with anticipation. Part of me wanted to heed the warning in Aunt Mildred's letter, to throw away the key and forget about the locked door. But a larger part, the part that had always gotten me into trouble, needed to know what lay beyond. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been oiled recently, not left untouched for years. The door swung open with a low creak, revealing a room bathed in shadows. The smell hit me first, a musty, organic odor tinged with something metallic that made my stomach churn. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I fumbled for the light switch. The single bare bulb that flickered to life revealed a scene that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. The room was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet, its walls covered in faded red symbols that I didn't recognize. A heavy wooden table dominated the space, its surface stained dark and scratched with use. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with jars of murky liquid, bundles of dried herbs, and objects I didn't want to identify. But it was the book that drew my attention. Massive and bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin, it lay open on the table, its pages covered in dense, spidery writing. As I approached, drawn by a morbid fascination, I realized the writing was in English, though the words made little sense. And with the third incantation, the veil shall be lifted, allowing passage between worlds. But beware, for what comes through may not be easily sent back. I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking. This had to be some kind of joke, an elaborate hoax. Aunt Mildred must have been playing a prank, trying to scare me from beyond the grave. There was no way this could be real. But as I turned to leave, to forget I'd ever found this room, my eye caught something that made my blood run cold. A photograph, pinned to the wall beside the door. In it, Aunt Mildred stood proudly in this very room, surrounded by a group of people in dark robes. Their faces were obscured, but their postures radiated an aura of menace. And there, on the table behind them, lay a body. My hands trembling, I unpinned the photo for a closer look. As I did, I noticed writing on the back. The Covenant of the Eternal Night, 1954. The first successful crossing. I staggered back, the photo fluttering to the floor. This was real. All of it. The symbols, the book, the rituals. My family, my own flesh and blood, had been involved in something dark and terrible. As if triggered by this realization, the house around me seemed to come alive. The floorboards creaked, the walls groaned, and I could have sworn I heard whispers echoing from empty rooms. Panic set in, and I bolted from the hidden room, slamming the door behind me. I ran through the house, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. The odd angles of the walls, the strange symbols hidden in the wallpaper patterns, the mirrors that never seemed to reflect quite right. It had all been there, hiding in plain sight. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, peeling out of the driveway with a screech of tires. It wasn't until I was miles away, my heart rate finally slowing, that I realized I still clutched the key in my hand. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination, a vivid waking dream brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that book, that chilling photograph. I couldn't bring myself to return to the house, but I couldn't stay away either. I found myself driving past it at odd hours, half expecting to see hooded figures slipping in and out, or eldritch horrors oozing from the windows. But it always stood silent and still, revealing nothing of the secrets it held. Desperate for answers, I dove into research, spending countless hours in libraries and online forums dedicated to the occult. What I found only deepened the mystery. References to the Covenant of the Eternal Night were few and far between, but what little I uncovered painted a disturbing picture of an ancient cult dedicated to bridging the gap between our world and something else. And my family had been at the center of it all, generation after generation, working in secret to tear down the walls of reality. For what purpose? I couldn't begin to fathom. As the weeks passed, strange things began to happen. I'd wake in the night to find my apartment rearranged, books open to pages I'd never read. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. And the dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams of other worlds, and the monstrous things that inhabited them. I knew then that I couldn't run from this. Whatever my family had started, whatever door they had opened, it wasn't going to close on its own. The responsibility Aunt Mildred spoke of in her letter was now mine, whether I wanted it or not. So I find myself back at the house, key in hand, standing once again before that fateful door. This time I'm prepared, I've learned what I can of the old ways, gathered what defenses I could. I don't know if it will be enough, but I have to try. Because if I don't close this door, if I don't end what my family started, who knows what might come through next. As I turn the key in the lock, I can't help but wonder, how many other families out there have similar secrets? How many other houses hold hidden rooms full of ancient horrors? And most chillingly, how thin is the veil between our world and the realms beyond? I push open the door, steeling myself for what lies ahead. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. I'll never look at a locked door the same way again. Because now I know that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones hiding under our beds or in our closets. They're the ones lurking in our family trees, waiting for an unsuspecting descendant to unlock their cage. The sickening crunch of metal on metal shattered the quiet night, jolting me awake. As my car spun off the lonely desert road, tires screeching against gravel, I had no idea that this accident was just the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very limits of survival and sanity. I'd been driving for hours, making my way from Los Angeles to Phoenix for a job interview. The desert highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the moonlit landscape. I must have dozed off for just a second, one moment of weakness after hours of monotonous driving. That's all it took for disaster to strike. My old Honda Civic came to rest at an awkward angle, half in a ditch, the front end crumpled like an aluminum can. Steam hissed from under the hood, and the acrid smell of burnt rubber filled the air. I sat there for a moment, dazed, my heart pounding in my chest. A quick self-assessment revealed no major injuries, just some bruises and a cut on my forehead that was bleeding more than it hurt. I fumbled for my phone, but of course, there was no signal. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the last town I'd passed and who knows how far from the next one. The realization of just how isolated I was began to sink in, bringing with it a wave of panic. That's when I saw the headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. Relief washed over me. Someone was coming. Someone. Help was on the way. The vehicle, a large pickup truck, slowed as it approached, coming to a stop behind my wrecked car. In the harsh glare of its headlights, I could make out a lone figure climbing out of the driver's seat. "You all right in there?" A gruff voice called out. I managed to push my door open, wincing at the screech of bent metal. "Yeah," I called back, my voice shaky. "I think so. Just shaken up." The man approached, his features coming into focus as he got closer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the desert sun. His eyes, when they met mine, were disconcertingly intense. "That's quite a wreck you got there," he said, surveying the damage. "You're lucky to be walking away from it." I nodded, still a bit dazed. "Yeah, I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. Stupid, I know." He grunted in agreement. "Well, ain't no way that car's getting you anywhere tonight. Nearest town's about 50 miles that way." He jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "I can give you a ride if you want. Got a phone at my place you can use to call a tow truck." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to be wary of strangers, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did I have? I couldn't very well stay here with my wrecked car, and walking 50 miles through the desert night wasn't an option. "That'd be great, thank you," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a confidence I didn't feel. He nodded and turned back towards his truck. "Name's Earl, by the way," he called over his shoulder. "John," I replied, gathering what I could from my car before locking it up. As I climbed into Earl's truck, the knot of unease in my stomach grew. The interior was cluttered and smelled of stale cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. Something metallic and vaguely unpleasant. Earl started the engine and pulled back onto the road. We drove in silence for a while, the monotonous desert landscape rolling by outside the windows. I tried to make small talk, but Earl's responses were curt, bordering on unfriendly. After about 20 minutes, Earl turned off the main road onto a dirt track I wouldn't have even noticed if we hadn't taken it. The truck bounced and jolted as we made our way deeper into the desert. Where exactly do you live?" I asked, unable to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "Not far now," Earl grunted, his eyes fixed on the rough path ahead. Another 10 minutes passed before a structure loomed out of the darkness. It was a ramshackle house, more of a large shack, really, surrounded by piles of rusted machinery and old car parts. The whole scene looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Earl pulled up in front of the house and cut the engine. The silence that followed was oppressive. "Well, here we are," he said, climbing out of the truck. "Come on in and we'll get you sorted out with that phone call." I followed him hesitantly, every instinct screaming at me to run. But run where? I was miles from anywhere, in unfamiliar territory. I had no choice but to follow Earl into his home. The interior of the house was dimly lit and cluttered, with a musty smell that made me want to gag. Earl led me through to what appeared to be a kitchen, gesturing vaguely towards an ancient rotary phone on the wall. "There you go," he said. "I'll give you some privacy." He shuffled out of the room, leaving me alone. I picked up the receiver, my hand shaking slightly, and was met with silence. No dial tone. The phone was dead. Earl," I called out. "I think there's something wrong with your phone." No response. I stepped out of the kitchen, peering down the dark hallway. "Earl?" That's when I heard it. A muffled thump, and what sounded like a moan coming from somewhere deeper in the house. My blood ran cold. Every fiber of my being told me to get out, to run as fast and as far as I could. But curiosity, that damned human trait that so often leads us into trouble, got the better of me. I found myself moving down the hallway towards the source of the sound. At the end of the hall was a door, slightly ajar. The sounds were definitely coming from behind it. I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. What I saw in that room will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a makeshift operating room, with harsh fluorescent lights illuminating a scene straight out of a horror movie. In the center was a metal table, and on that table, I retched, barely managing to keep the contents of my stomach down. A person, or what was left of one, lay strapped to the table. Parts had been removed, organs exposed, and standing over this grisly tableau, wearing a blood-splattered apron, was Earl. He turned to me slowly, a scalpel glinting in his hand. Now, he said, his voice eerily calm. "You weren't supposed to see this, but since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran, fueled by a terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I burst out of the house and into the desert night, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from that house of horrors. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I dare to look back. There was no sign of pursuit, just the vast, indifferent desert stretching out in all directions. I walked through the night, guided only by the stars and my desperate need to put as much distance between myself and Earl's house as possible. As dawn broke, I stumbled onto a highway. A passing trucker took pity on me, giving me a ride to the nearest town where I immediately went to the police. They found Earl's house, of course, and with it, evidence of horrors that went back decades. Missing persons cases from across 3 states were finally closed. Earl himself was nowhere to be found, having vanished into the desert he knew so well. I've tried to move on with my life, to forget that night, but I can't shake the memory of what I saw in that room, or the casual way Earl had invited me to join in his gruesome work. It's changed me, made me wary of strangers and isolated places. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, and I see headlights approaching in my rearview mirror, I feel a flutter of panic in my chest. I think about Earl, about the monsters that walk among us wearing human faces. And I keep driving, my doors locked and my eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. Because I've learned that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones hiding in the shadows. They're the ones that offer you help when you're at your most vulnerable, luring you in with the promise of safety only to reveal their true nature when it's too late to escape. So if you ever find yourself stranded on a lonely road in the middle of nowhere, think twice before accepting help from a passing stranger, because you never know when that good Samaritan might turn out to be your worst nightmare. The beam of my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the cave walls. As the darkness closed in around us, a realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We weren't alone down here. Something was moving in the inky blackness beyond our light, and it was getting closer. It had started as a fun adventure, a chance to explore the infamous Stillwater caves that had been the subject of local legends for generations. There were 5 of us: me, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend Mia, and our college buddies Chris and Sarah. We'd all grown up hearing stories about the caves, tales of lost explorers, strange noises, and inexplicable phenomena. But we were young, cocky, and sure that we could handle whatever the caves might throw at us. How wrong we were. We'd entered the cave system early that morning, armed with maps, supplies, and enough enthusiasm to power a small city. The first few hours were exhilarating. We marveled at the intricate rock formations, squeezed through tight passages, and joked about the legends we'd heard. "Watch out for the cave monsters," Chris had laughed, his voice echoing off the walls. If only we'd known how prophetic those words would turn out to be. It was around midday when things started to go wrong. We'd ventured deeper into the cave than we'd originally planned, drawn by the promise of a massive chamber that was rumored to house prehistoric paintings. That's when we realized we were lost. The passages all looked the same, twisting corridors of rock that seemed to shift and change when we weren't looking directly at them. Our maps became useless, the landmarks we'd used to navigate suddenly unfamiliar. "This doesn't make sense," Jake muttered, studying the map for the 100th time. "We should have reached the main chamber by now." Panic started to set in as we realized the gravity of our situation. We were lost in one of the largest cave systems in the country, with limited supplies and no clear way out. That's when we heard it for the first time, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very walls around us. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a cross between a growl and the grinding of massive stones. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. Small rocks and dust rained down from the ceiling. "Earthquake!" Mia shouted. "We need to find cover." We ran blindly through the tunnels, the sound of falling rocks growing louder behind us. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually, we found ourselves in a large cavern, relatively free from falling debris. As the tremors subsided, we took stock of our situation. We were alive, but even more lost than before. And our problems were just beginning. In the aftermath of the quake, our primary flashlight had been damaged. We were left with only a couple of smaller backup lights, their beams seeming pitifully inadequate in the vast darkness of the cave. That's when Chris noticed it, a faint glow coming from one of the tunnels leading out of the cavern. It was a soft, pulsating light, unlike anything that should exist this far underground. "Maybe it's a way out," he suggested hopefully. Against my better judgment, we decided to follow the light. As we moved deeper into the tunnel, the air grew noticeably colder, and a strange smell permeated the air, something ancient and organic that made my skin crawl. The tunnel opened up into another chamber, and what we saw there stopped us in our tracks. The walls were covered in paintings, but not the prehistoric art we'd been expecting. These were newer and far more disturbing. Twisted, inhuman figures danced across the rock face, surrounding images of what looked like human sacrifices. But it was the source of the light that truly terrified us. In the center of the chamber stood a pillar of softly glowing crystal, and suspended within it, perfectly preserved, was a creature out of a nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid, but that's where any resemblance to humanity ended. Its body was elongated and skeletal, with too many limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its head was oversized and bulbous, with no discernible eyes but a mouthful of needle-like teeth. "What the fuck is that thing?" Jake breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could respond, the crystal began to pulse more rapidly. Cracks appeared on its surface, spreading like a web across the glowing material. "We need to get out of here," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded despite the terror coursing through my veins. Now, we turned to run, but found our path blocked. The tunnel we'd come through had collapsed, sealing us in the chamber, and from the other tunnels leading out of the room came sounds, skittering noises and low, guttural growls that spoke of things that had no place in our world. That's when my flashlight began to flicker, plunging us intermittently into darkness. And in those moments of blackness, I could swear I saw movement, swift, unnatural movement that disappeared as soon as the light returned. We huddled together in the center of the room, our backs to each other, watching in horror as the crystal continued to fracture. With each crack, the air grew colder, and that otherworldly smell intensified. "What do we do?" Sarah sobbed, her earlier bravado completely gone. I wished I had an answer for her. I wished I could wake up and find this was all just a terrible nightmare. But the cold stone beneath my feet and the very real fear gripping my heart told me this was all too real. A particularly loud crack from the crystal made us all jump. A piece had fallen away, and something was emerging from within. A long, spindly limb tipped with claws that looked sharp enough to shred steel. In that moment, staring at the stuff of nightmares literally coming to life before our eyes, something in me snapped. A cold, clear certainty washed over me. We were going to die down here, torn apart by creatures that shouldn't exist, unless... "The paintings," I said suddenly, my mind racing. "Look at the paintings." The others followed my gaze, uncomprehending at first, but then Mia gasped. "The sacrifices," she whispered. "They're containing something." She was right. The twisted figures in the paintings weren't dancing. They were performing some kind of ritual around the human sacrifices. And in the background of each image was a shape eerily similar to the crystal pillar, but whole and unbroken. "I think," I said slowly, the weight of what I was about to suggest sitting heavily in my stomach. "I think the creatures were trapped here, sealed away, and it took blood to do it." The implications of what I was saying hung in the air between us. The only way to stop whatever was emerging from that crystal might be to recreate the ritual depicted in the paintings, which meant, "No," Jake said firmly, realizing where my thoughts were going. "No way. We're not sacrificing anyone." But even as he spoke, more of the crystal fell away. The creature inside was more visible now, its alien features becoming clearer with each passing second. And the noises from the other tunnels were getting louder, closer. "We might not have a choice," Chris said, his voice shaking. It's one of us or all of us." The next few minutes were a blur of argument and tearful pleas. In the end, it was Sarah who made the decision for us. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll be the sacrifice." We tried to talk her out of it, but her mind was made up. With shaking hands and tears streaming down our faces, we prepared for the unthinkable. Using the paintings as a guide, we positioned Sarah in front of the crystal. The rest of us formed a circle around her, our hands linked. As the last pieces of crystal fell away and the creature began to emerge fully, we started to chant. The words came to us instinctively, as if they were being pulled from some deep, primal part of our brains. What happened next, I can barely bring myself to recount. There was a flash of light, a scream that might have been Sarah's or might have come from the creature itself, And then darkness. When we came to, we were lying near the entrance of the cave. How we got there, I don't know. Sarah was gone. The authorities searched for weeks but found no trace of her. The deeper parts of the cave system had collapsed, sealing off whatever horrors lay within. We never spoke about what happened down there. Not to the police, not to Sarah's family, not even to each other. Who would believe us? Some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that unearthly scream ringing in my ears. I wonder if we did the right thing. I wonder if Sarah's sacrifice truly sealed away the evil we encountered, or if we only bought ourselves some time. And sometimes, when I'm in a dark room or a tight space, I swear I can hear something moving in the shadows. Something that's waiting, biding its time until it can break free once again. So if you're ever exploring a cave and you come across strange paintings or glowing crystals, turn back. Run as fast as you can towards the light of day. Because some things are meant to stay buried in the dark, and the price of keeping them there is higher than you can imagine. The security camera footage flickered on the ancient monitor, and my blood ran cold. There, in grainy black and white, was a figure moving through the warehouse. A figure that shouldn't exist. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, I realized that my boring night shift had just become a fight for survival against something that defied explanation. I never wanted this job. Night security at Millbrook Industrial Storage was about as far from my dream career as you could get. But bills needed paying, and beggars can't be choosers. So there I was, 3 months into mind-numbing night shifts, patrolling endless rows of crates and machinery in a cavernous warehouse on the outskirts of town. The night started like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m., relieved the day guard, and settled in for 12 hours of mind-numbing boredom. I did my first round of checks, then planted myself in front of the security monitors with a thermos of coffee and a dog-eared paperback. It was just past midnight when I first noticed something odd. A flicker of movement on one of the monitors caught my eye. I leaned in, squinting at the grainy image. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure dart between 2 stacks of crates, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. I shrugged it off as a trick of the light, or maybe my imagination running wild after hours of solitude, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. An hour later, it happened again. This time I was sure I'd seen something. A tall, impossibly thin figure, moving with an unnatural fluidity through the warehouse. I rewound the footage, my heart pounding. But the recording showed nothing but empty aisles. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet of the warehouse. A soft, rhythmic tapping like footsteps, but not quite right. It was coming from the far end of the building, near the loading docks. Every instinct told me to stay put, to call for backup. But I was the only security on duty, and if there was an intruder, it was my job to investigate. With shaking hands, I grabbed my flashlight and radio and stepped out of the security office. The warehouse was different at night. During the day, it was a hive of activity, filled with the sounds of forklifts and workers. But now, it was silent and still, the rows of shelves and machinery casting long shadows in the dim emergency lighting. I made my way towards the loading docks, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The tapping sound had stopped, but I could feel something, a presence, just beyond the reach of my light. "Hello?" I called out, wincing at how my voice echoed in the vast space. "This is security. If someone's there, come out now." Silence. Then, a sound that made my skin crawl. A low, guttural growl that no human throat could produce. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the warehouse. And for a split second, I saw it. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with limbs that were too long and jointed in impossible ways. Its skin was a sickly gray, seeming to shift and ripple as if it wasn't quite solid. but it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Featureless except for a wide, gaping maw filled with rows of needle-like teeth. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I could hear it behind me, moving with a speed that defied physics, its footsteps a rapid staccato on the concrete floor. I reached the security office and slammed the door shut, fumbling with trembling hands to lock it. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a scratch at the door. Another, the sound of metal groaning under immense pressure. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the door. The lock wouldn't hold. Whatever that thing was, it was going to get in. My gaze fell on the security monitors. Most showed empty aisles, but one showed the creature, standing right outside the office door. But that was impossible. I could hear it trying to break in, could see the door beginning to buckle. How could it be on the monitor? As I watched, transfixed with terror, the creature on the screen turned to look directly at the camera. Its featureless face split into that horrifying grin, and then it waved. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. I screamed, throwing my arms up to protect my face, but when I lowered them, the office was empty. The thing was gone. Shaking, I approached the ruined door. The hallway beyond was empty and silent. I turned back to the monitors, but they showed nothing but the usual empty warehouse scenes. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? A noise from the warehouse floor snapped me back to reality. The sound of breaking glass, followed by an inhuman shriek that made my blood run cold. I had to get out of here. I had to call for help. But as I reached for my radio, I realized with dawning horror that it was gone. I must have dropped it when I was running. The phone. I could use the landline in the office to call the police. But when I picked up the receiver, there was nothing. No dial tone, just dead silence. More noises from the warehouse, crashes, bangs, the sound of heavy objects being thrown around. And underneath it all, that terrible growling. I was trapped. Whatever that thing was, it was between me and the exit. My only hope was to wait it out until the morning shift arrived. 6 hours. I just had to survive for 6 hours. I barricaded myself in the office as best I could, pushing the heavy desk against what was left of the door. Then I huddled in the corner, my eyes fixed on the monitors, watching for any sign of the creature. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every noise, every shadow made me flinch. Twice, I saw the thing on the monitors, moving through the warehouse with that unnatural grace. Each time, it would stop and look directly at the camera, that terrible grin splitting its face. As dawn approached, the noises from the warehouse grew quieter. The last time I saw the creature on the monitors, it seemed smaller somehow, less solid, as the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the high windows of the warehouse. It looked at the camera one last time, gave that chilling wave, and then dissolved into shadows. When the morning shift arrived, they found me huddled in the corner of the destroyed office, babbling about monsters and impossible things. The warehouse was a mess, with toppled shelves and broken crates scattered everywhere. But of the creature, there was no sign. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? The security footage showed nothing but empty aisles all night. The official report blamed vandals, though how they could have gotten in and out without triggering any alarms was never explained. I quit that day. No job was worth what I'd been through, but quitting didn't end it. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can hear that tapping sound again. And in the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of a tall, impossibly thin figure, always just out of sight when I turn to look. I don't know what I encountered that night in the warehouse. I don't know if it was real or if I suffered some kind of mental break. But I do know this. I'll never work another night shift as long as I live. Because when the sun goes down and the shadows grow long, there are things that come out to play. Things that shouldn't exist in our world, but do. And sometimes, they like to wave at the camera, just to let you know they see you too. The GPS chirped, urging me to turn onto a narrow dirt road that snaked into the darkening forest. As I guided my car down the unfamiliar path, a sense of unease crept over me. I was about to make a delivery to an address that wasn't on any map, in a part of the country where cell phones fell silent and strangers were met with suspicion. Little did I know, I was driving straight into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality. My name's Alex, and I've been a delivery driver for the past 3 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and I enjoy the solitude of the open road. This particular evening, I was making a last-minute run that had come in just as I was about to clock out. The package was unmarked, which was unusual, and the delivery address was so remote that my supervisor had to manually input it into the GPS. "Be careful out there," he'd said as I left, his brow furrowed with concern. "That area can be tricky." I'd laughed it off at the time, but as I drove deeper into the woods, his words echoed in my mind. The trees seemed to press in on either side of the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The fading daylight barely penetrated the thick canopy overhead, plunging the forest into an eerie twilight. After what felt like hours but was probably only about 40 minutes, I came to a clearing. In the center stood a ramshackle cabin, its weathered boards and sagging roof a stark contrast to the pristine forest surrounding it. A flickering porch light cast long shadows across the overgrown yard. I parked and grabbed the package, double-checking the address. This had to be the place, though it looked like no one had lived here for years. As I approached the porch, the wooden steps creaked ominously under my feet. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing unnaturally in the quiet clearing. "Delivery," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard movement inside. The door creaked open, revealing a face that made my blood run cold. The man who stood before me was ancient, his skin like parchment stretched over a skull. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me, milky white and sightless, yet somehow fixed directly on me with an intensity that made me want to run. "You're late," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to bolt. "I'm sorry, sir. The address was difficult to find." A smile spread across his face, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Oh, it's not difficult to find at all," he said. "For those who are meant to come here." Before I could respond, he snatched the package from my hands with surprising speed and strength. "Come inside," he said, turning and disappearing into the dark interior of the cabin. "You have a long night ahead of you." Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back in my car and drive as fast and as far as I could. But something, curiosity, stupidity, or perhaps something far more sinister, compelled me to step over the threshold. The inside of the cabin was larger than it appeared from the outside, and far cleaner. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes bound in materials I didn't want to examine too closely. Strange symbols were carved into the wooden beams overhead, seeming to writhe and shift in the flickering candlelight. The old man stood in the center of the room, the package now open in his hands. From it, he withdrew a small, ornate box that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his blind eyes somehow finding mine. I shook my head, then remembered he couldn't see. "No, sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "This, my young friend, is a key to doors that were never meant to be opened." As he spoke, he opened the box. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the symbols on the beams began to glow with an eerie blue light. The air in the cabin grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. "What's happening?" I gasped, backing towards the door. But when I turned, the door was gone, replaced by a solid wall of writhing shadows. The old man's laughter grew louder, more maniacal. "The veil is thinning," he cackled. "They're coming through." The The room began to spin, reality seeming to warp and bend around us. I saw things emerging from the shadows, creatures with too many limbs, eyes where eyes shouldn't be, mouths filled with impossible geometries of teeth. I screamed, the sound lost in the cacophony of otherworldly noises now filling the cabin. The old man stood in the center of it all, arms raised, chanting in a language that hurt my ears and made my mind reel. In desperation, I lunged for the box in his hands. If this was the key, maybe closing it would end this nightmare. As my fingers closed around it, a jolt of energy surged through me. Visions flashed before my eyes. Other worlds, vast and terrifying, where the laws of physics were mere suggestions and life took forms that defied comprehension. The old man's chanting reached a fever pitch. The creatures were fully in our world now, their impossible forms filling the cabin. One reached for me, its touch burning like acid. With a final surge of will, I slammed the box shut. Everything stopped. The silence was deafening after the chaos of moments before. The creatures were gone, the symbols no longer glowed, and the air cleared. The old man stood frozen, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "No," he whispered. "No, you fool. Do you realize what you've done?" I didn't stay to find out. The door had reappeared, and I ran for it with every ounce of strength I had left. I burst out of the cabin and into the cool night air, not stopping until I reached my car. As I sped away, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The cabin was gone. In its place was nothing but unbroken forest, as if it had never existed at all. I drove through the night, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky and I was several states away. Only then did I pull over and try to process what had happened. Part of me wanted to believe it was all a hallucination, a vivid nightmare brought on by exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But the burns on my arm where the creature had touched me told a different story, as did the small, ornate box sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The box I didn't remember taking, but somehow knew I couldn't let fall into the wrong hands again. I never went back to my job. How could I, knowing what I now knew about the true nature of reality? Instead, I've spent the years since that night researching, trying to understand what I experienced and what it means for our world. I've learned that there are places where the boundaries between worlds are thin, where things can slip through if given the chance. I've discovered that there are people, and things that were once people, who seek to open those boundaries wider, to let the chaos of other realms spill into ours. And I've realized that sometimes it's the most ordinary people who end up standing between our world and unimaginable horrors. A delivery driver, making an unscheduled stop at the end of a long day, can end up saving reality as we know it. So if you ever find yourself on a dark, lonely road, following directions to an address that doesn't seem to exist, be careful. Be very, very careful. Because you never know when a routine delivery might turn into a battle for the fate of our world. And the next time, we might not be so lucky. The crunch of leaves under my boots echoed through the silent forest as I made my way back to my campsite. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving me in near total darkness, save for the weak beam of my flashlight. It wasn't until I reached my tent that I realized something was terribly wrong. My car, which I'd parked just a few yards away, was gone. And carved into a nearby tree, illuminated by my trembling light, were 5 words that made my blood run cold. You shouldn't have come here. I'd always been an avid outdoorsman, spending most of my weekends hiking and camping in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. But this trip was different. I'd ventured further off the beaten path than ever before, drawn by rumors of a pristine lake hidden deep in the forest, untouched by human hands. The journey had been challenging, requiring me to navigate through dense underbrush and over treacherous terrain. But when I finally broke through the trees and saw the lake sparkling in the afternoon sun, I knew it had been worth it. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the surrounding mountains like a mirror. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, unspoiled by civilization. I set up camp near the shore, feeling a sense of pride at having discovered this hidden gem. As the day wore on, I explored the area, taking photos and reveling in the solitude. It wasn't until the sun began to set that I noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of nature at rest, but an eerie, oppressive silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Nothing. Unnerved, I decided to turn in early, planning to hike back out in the morning. That's when I realized I'd left my water purifier down by the lake, not wanting to risk drinking untreated water. I grabbed my flashlight and headed back to retrieve it. It should have been a quick trip. 5 minutes, tops. But somehow, on the way back, I got turned around. The trees all looked the same in the darkness, and the terrain seemed unfamiliar. What should have been a straight shot back to my campsite turned into an hour-long ordeal of wandering in circles. When I finally found my way back, I was exhausted and disoriented. And now, faced with my missing car and that chilling message, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help. But there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was miles from the nearest cell tower. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond my campsite, and I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the night. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, a tall, shadowy figure darting between the trees. But when I looked closer, there was nothing there. My mind raced. Who could have taken my car? How did they even find it, this far off any marked trails? And why leave that message? I retreated to my tent, zipping it up as if the thin fabric could offer any real protection. Sleep was out of the question. I sat there, flashlight in hand, jumping at every sound. As the night wore on, the noises grew closer, more deliberate. Footsteps circling my tent, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, and voices, whispers in a language I didn't recognize, coming from all directions at once. By the time dawn broke, I was a nervous wreck. As soon as there was enough light to see, I packed up my essential gear and started hiking in the direction I thought would lead me back to civilization. The forest felt different in the daylight, but no less menacing. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. More than once, I could have sworn I saw faces watching me from knotholes and hollows. It was midday when I stumbled upon the clearing. At first, I felt a surge of relief, thinking I'd found a trail or fire road. But as I got closer, my hope turned to horror. The clearing was perfectly circular, about 50 feet in diameter. At its center stood a ring of stones, each carved with the same strange symbols I'd seen in my feverish imagination the night before. And scattered around the ring were remains. Animal bones, mostly, but some looked disturbingly human. I turned to run, but found my path blocked. They melted out of the forest like ghosts, tall, impossibly thin figures with skin the color of bark and eyes that glowed with an inner fire. Their faces were smooth and featureless, save for wide, grinning mouths filled with needle-sharp teeth. They moved with inhuman grace, encircling me before I could even think to run. One of them stepped forward, its head tilting at an impossible angle as it regarded me. When it spoke, its voice was like rustling leaves and creaking wood. "Welcome, trespasser," it said, the words forming in my mind rather than my ears. "We've been waiting for you." I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from this nightmare. But I was frozen in place, my body refusing to obey my panicked mind. "Your kind has forgotten us," the creature continued. "Forgotten the old ways, the old bargains. But we remember, and now you will remember too." It reached out a long, spindly arm, its fingers barely an inch from my face. I could feel the power radiating from it, ancient and terrible. Just as its fingers were about to touch me, a horn blasted through the clearing. loud, deep, and undeniably human. The creatures recoiled, hissing in pain or anger. A voice boomed out from the trees. "Leave him be, forest folk! He's under our protection now!" I turned to see a group of people emerging from the forest. They were dressed in a mishmash of modern outdoor gear and what looked like ancient tribal garb. Each carried a staff or spear, and they moved with the confidence of those who knew the land intimately. The lead figure, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, stepped forward. "Go back to your groves," she commanded the creatures. "This one is not for you." For a moment, I thought the creatures would attack. They outnumbered the newcomers at least 2 to 1, but something in the woman's stance, in the power of her voice, made them hesitate. Finally, the one who had spoken to me turned to her. "The old bargains still stand, Watcher. We will go, but not empty-handed. The price must be paid." The woman nodded grimly. "And it will be, but not with this one's life or soul. Go now, before we make you go." With a sound like wind through dead leaves, the creatures melted back into the forest. In moments, it was as if they had never been there at all. I collapsed to my knees, my body shaking with delayed terror and relief. The woman knelt beside me, her face etched with concern and something else, recognition. "It's all right," she said softly. "You're safe now, but we need to get you out of here. Can you walk?" I nodded mutely, allowing her to help me to my feet. As we made our way out of the clearing, I found my voice again. What were those things?" I asked. "And who are you?" She sighed heavily. "Those were the forgotten ones, ancient spirits of the forest, neither good nor evil, but dangerous to those who don't know the old ways. As for us, we're the Watchers. We keep the balance between their world and ours." Over the next few hours, as we hiked back to what passed for civilization in these parts, she explained more. How there were places in the world where the veil between realities was thin, how her people had been guarding these places for generations, keeping unwary travelers safe and maintaining an uneasy peace with the entities that dwelled in the in-between. "Your car is safe," she assured me. "We moved it to protect you. You can have it back once we reach the ranger station." As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had irrevocably changed. The world I thought I knew had been torn away, revealing something far stranger and more terrifying beneath. "What happens now?" I asked as we neared the end of our journey. The woman, Sarah, she'd told me to call her, gave me a long, appraising look. "That depends on you," she said finally. "You can try to forget what you've seen, go back to your old life, or, I prompted, or you can join us. Help us protect others from what lurks in the shadows. It's a hard life and dangerous, but it's necessary." As we emerged from the forest, my car sitting innocuously in the ranger station parking lot, I knew my decision was already made. How could I go back to my mundane existence now, knowing what I now knew? "When do we start?" I asked. Sarah smiled, a mix of approval and sadness in her eyes. "We already have," she said. "Welcome to the Watchers, my friend. The real journey is just beginning."